Everybody, today we're going to be updating our culture tier list for the Rise from Ruin expansion. For those of you guys who never really watch my tier list videos, you should know that I kind of clickbait you with the title tier list. If you just want to see the tier list, you can go to the end of this video and I will show you, but I would not recommend doing that. That's because I use tier list videos and as an excuse to go very in-depth on every single culture. We will be going over every little facet of them and keeping you guys totally up to date with everything. I will hopefully add timestamps to this video, so if you're interested in a specific culture, you can go click on that and you can see exactly what's going on. What is going to be covered then in this video? We will cover the theme of the culture, the overall idea of the culture, without factoring in its power or specific numbers. What does this culture do? What are the world map bonuses of the culture? Before we go into battles on the strategic layer, what is this culture doing for you? What does this culture do uniquely? Many cultures have very, very unique aspects to them that are totally alien to other cultures that they can't imitate, they can't do. There's nothing that they can even try to do that is similar to some aspects. What are the spells and units of the culture? And that is literally just going into the spells, the units, and sometimes the buildings. Does it have any major differences in power between single player and multiplayer? Now, this one I should probably reword a little bit. I'm not meaning specifically single player and multiplayer, but I do mean what different things could cause this culture to be different. For example, architects who play a small map will be very bad. Architects who play a very large map will be very good. Barbarians in multiplayer have an advantage over barbarians in single player. Things like that are worth noting. And then I'll give it an overall rating. And hopefully by the time I get to the overall rating, you can understand why we're doing that. Now, before we go any further, please make sure to like, please make sure to subscribe, and please make sure to leave a comment down below. All these things help me out immensely. Additionally, if you'd like to see videos like this and more, please make sure to subscribe to my Patreon, and by doing that, the link is in the description. That just helps me out a lot as well. And this video will take a while, so there will probably be a jump in the middle. You'll not notice it. I think I have to do this in 2 different takes. So let's start then talking about cultures. Number 1 is Feudal. Now, Feudal is the most basic culture in the game, and I'll go over if a culture is a subculture, I'll try to go over both sides simultaneously, but often I will need to break it down. Some cultures, like Dark, kind of very much differentiate at certain points, and, well, I just have to, kind of start acting like they're a different culture from each other, right? So, Feudal is pretty similar to each other. Baseline Feudal has no actual effects here. And what is the theme then of Feudal? The theme of Feudal is effectively making your dudes tanky. It makes your army tanky with very low actual cost to doing so. Although Aristocracy does take some renown to get your units tanky, and Monarchy does give you a little bit of damage. Both of them are some of the tankiest cultures in the game. For Monarchy, then, let's say, the world map bonuses of Feudal Monarchy are this, and this is going to go into the what does this culture do uniquely. The world map bonuses for Feudal Monarchy are the Monarch's Dominion. Monarch's Dominion is extremely unique and it's unique. Literally no other culture can do this. Now, when we start talking about cultures, often they do things that break the rules of the game. Sometimes breaking the rules of the game can be very interesting, and so in game design you allow certain things to break the rules because then it allows them to differentiate themselves from anything else, and Monarch's Dominion is like that. Anytime a culture does something like that, I'll try to note it because there are rules, and then sometimes they break the rules without noting it. So while Army Leader, all units in the army with For the Monarch cost negative 100% unit upkeep. Unit upkeep, as you can see right here, is normally listed, and it says it reduces gold, mana upkeep, but never below 50%. With Monarch's Dominion, that is a total lie. Monarch's Dominion gives you negative, I think it's actually coded as like negative 9,000% of all types of upkeep. Imperium, gold, mana, souls, everything. Any unit that is in your Monarch stack costs 0, outright 0. If you literally cannot in the game ever reach an upkeep high enough that would possibly pass its threshold. So Feudal Monarchy, as you might imagine, is very good at maintaining high upkeep units, like dragons, like tier 5 mythics as a whole, but dragons in particular have been often noted to be very, very good with Feudal Monarchy. So Feudal Monarchy, what does it do uniquely? It is a very basic culture, but it breaks the rule in one very large way. The other thing it does is every unit in your stack, if you're fighting alongside your monarch, you will get 1 defense, 1 resistance, 10% damage, and 10 morale. Although I did say that Feudal generally made your units tankier, and you can see damage here, I would say that due to the way damage stacks additively with each other, that it is the lesser part of this bonus. All defense will reduce damage taken by 10% of what you are doing to take. So if you have 3 defense, you would deal, let me phrase this. If you're doing melee damage into a unit with 3 defense, the 3 defense will mean you do 90%, 90%, 90%. Each time you're going to lose 10% of your damage, but 10% of the remaining damage, which is to say, if you were to take 20 damage and have 10 defense, then going up 1 more defense would make you take 18 damage. It technically has, I wouldn't say, it does not actually have diminishing returns. Now, damage, on the other hand, stacks additively, meaning it does have diminishing returns. So, if you are going to deal 200% damage, then 210% damage would only be a 5% boost. This is all to say that, yes, I think Feudal is still basically a tanky culture. Now, fortunately, I don't need to spend that much time on Feudal Monarchy because that's all it does. If you fight with the Monarch, or if you're within your own domain, you get big buffs. And if you are in your Monarch stack, you have no upkeep. Monarchy is really good at running then stacks that can evolve, promote, or just get really high tier. The notable which of is dragons. Feudal aristocracy is a much, much more complicated one. Each city is led, and feudal aristocracy has been nerfed a lot since I last made this video. And so its place, I would say, has gone down a lot. Feudal aristocracy has many differences that I need to note now because it is so much weaker in so many different ways, but in ways that might seem invisible until I tell them to you. So each city has a feudal house. Once you put in the governor of a city, all units built in that city or summoned on top of that hero or lord become ruled by that house. If you're in the stack of the house leader, not if you're in the battle anymore. It used to be that so long as the ruler of your house was in the battle, you would get buffed. It is now only if you're in the stack itself. That was a very large nerf, actually, because in the past you could summon units. For example, you could summon everything from your capital. You could build and draft everything from your capital, and so long as your lord was in the fight, then they would all get boosted. That is no longer the case. So that's actually a fairly significant nerf, right? Now, if a unit is within the stack of its house leader, it will then get, every time the liege lord gets renown, the units in the stack will get some experience. In addition to that, they get the liege lord bonus. For every level of renown you have, starting at 1, then 2, 3, 4, every unit in the stack will get negative 10% base unit upkeep, regenerate 5 hit points on the world map, get 10 hit points, and get 5 morale. Of course, that does stack up to negative 40% base unit upkeep, 20 healing, 40 hit points, and 20 morale. Very good bonuses, but you do need to get full renown, and you would need to get full renown on every single unit, which can be a bit hard to do, but they do stack up pretty good. Now, do note that this is regular unit upkeep. Unlike Monarchy, this is regular unit upkeep, so this one will only stack to 50%. If you have other sources of upkeep reduction, it will only stack to 50%, and it will only affect gold, and it will only affect mana. Still, in effect, though, a pretty good bonus. So, what does the culture do uniquely? To answer the question, Monarchy can run really high tier units and be very cheap with them and make everyone tanky. You can buff mythics a lot, and that is something worth noting for the purposes of this entire video. All cultures now buff mythics. That is no longer unique to feudal and mystic summoning. So that used to be unique to feudal. It's no longer unique to feudal. But Monarchy, I would still say, is good with Mythics because it removes their upkeep entirely, including the Imperium, which lets you run a lot, even into the early game. Feudal Aristocracy is very good, then, at getting your, just to be very tanky and to get some morale. So, both of them just very, very good at being tanky. Then, what are the spells and units of the culture? They do share some units, but they do have some differences. Their scout is just a scout. I believe he gets a low maintenance. She gets low maintenance. Otherwise, a totally unremarkable scout. Some scouts do have damage differences. Most scouts actually have damage differences, funny enough. You can see 8, 12, 16, 8, 8, 10, 7, 6, 3, 8, 0. So there are differences between scout damage, but reasonably this is not going to be impactful, so I won't mention it. Each scout does get one unique aspect to it though, and the feudal one is just low maintenance. Not really good, not really remarkable in any way. Their tier 1 shield unit, I would say, used to be one of the top tier ones, but now is mid tier. It is just a generic 75-0 statted shield unit whose only passive effect is the heavy shield. As long as it's not being flanked, it gets another defense and another resistance. So if you're being hit from the front, you have 6 defense and resistance. A decently tanky shield unit. Not as good as the best shield unit, but I would still say he's pretty decent. Their archer, unfortunately, does not share the same. At least they've got a good passive effect. The archer is 55-0-0, whose only defining attribute is shoot bow, having a 30% chance to sunder defense. Not very good. Maybe if that was 60 or 90%, but 30? 30? If you are playing Feudal Monarchy, then if you get all the way to Legend, then you will promote into a longbow. If you're playing Feudal Aristocracy, that will not happen. If you're playing Feudal Aristocracy, instead, if you get all the way to Legendary, then you will promote your defender to a Liege Guard. Now, the Liege Guard is a tier 3 shield unit. You can build this out of your capital. You can build the Liege Guard, and you can build the longbow out of your capital. The Liege Guard is a pretty generic tier 3 shield unit. He used to be stat very well compared to other shield units, but they have power creep to all shield units up to his level. He is now 100 HP, 6 defense, 3 resistance. He does still maintain the heavy shield, making him, as a shield unit, very uniquely tanky against magic damage from the front. Other tier 3 shield units will often have 2 or 3 resistance. None of them have 4 resistance from the front. Their unique ability is the Sworn Bond. They can link with a hero, and once they are linked, both units will take 50% of the damage. It used to be that only the Liege Guard would take 50% of the damage, but now both take 50% of the damage, which is a fairly significant nerf. Overall, the Liege Guard is significantly weaker than he used to be, and not at all culture defining for aristocracy. The longbow is a very powerful archer, although even for being an archer, still not that good. 85 HP, 2 defense, 2 resistance. The shoot bow ability still only has a 30% chance to sunder. By tier 3, it's pretty common that this 30% will effectively just not proc anymore. You would on average need 7 shots, I think, to get it to proc on other tier 3 units. So it's really not reliable. It's really not that good. Longbow, every attack gets +1 range as long as it's base, but Longshot is base. Longshot is a 3 AP automatic hit ranged attack with, again, a 30% chance to sunder, which is a bit odd. It should really be 60, 70. I mean, if it's a single shot, maybe 90. Maybe that would make it too good at focus firing. Maybe remove it from Longshot and put it on shoot bow. I don't know. But with 7 range and then the ability to use the champion medal to get another +1 range, Longshot, especially when experienced up, can become then an 8 range automatic hit ability. Pretty decent, that one. Okay, moving back, they do have a spell that can summon Militia. I'll get into that in 1 second. Militia himself is 70 HP, 1 defense, 0 resistance, 10 damage, no passive. This guy has been nerfed rather significantly since the last time we talked about cultures, losing damage, losing tankiness, and also his veterancy rewards have been reduced to half. He now only gets 5 HP per. Aspirant Knight, likewise, has also been nerfed down a little bit. His charge strike went from 28 damage down to 27 damage. He is a tier 2 shock unit. Tier 2 units tend to underperform pretty hard. Tier 2 shock unit with 80 HP, 3 defense, 1 resistance. Nothing really else here notable other than he is slippery. And if he hits a target that is next to another target, he does -6 damage. So the Aspirant Knight, he used to be a little bit more damaging. He's now less damaging. He, like all other tier 2 shock units, underperforms pretty considerably. The devs could, probably give old tier 2 units basically across the board 5 HP, other than maybe supports, I don't know. But he does have Aspirant Knight. If he does reach a legend rank, which will affect both Feudal Monarchy and Feudal Aristocracy, if he reaches legend ranked, he will promote into a Knight. Then what is a Knight? A Knight, you might get tired of hearing this, has also been nerfed. He went down from 31 damage to 27, and he lost Giant Slayer. Knight is a 120 HP, 5 defense, 3 resistance unit. As seems to be the theme amongst Feudal, he loses a little bit of defense for a little bit of resistance. Instead of being 6'2", he's 5'3". Now, this does mean he's a little bit squishier into melee, a little bit tankier into magic, not really worth mentioning that much. His primary aspects here are Inspiring Killer. Inspiring Killer works a little bit differently than you might imagine. It doesn't grant double morale bonus, it grants a second bonus on top of it, which actually makes it a little bit better than you would think. If Knights kill an enemy, it is pretty easy for them to top each other's morale off in like 1 or 2 kills. They can do it very, very quickly. Graceful Charge, whenever they do a charge attack, they get 1 grace, but it doesn't trigger on retaliation attacks or opportunity attacks. Then they have Slippery, so they can get out of any opportunity attacks. So obviously then, the Aspirant Knight and the Knight are very good at running into enemies and charging them, then on their turn running out of melee, not triggering the opportunity, and then getting the full charge damage bonus onto someone else. You can even have 2 units change places repeatedly, and they will repeatedly get their full charge bonus over and over again. Their support unit, the Bannerman, is a pretty decent support unit, I would say. Now, he does have 2 less damage on his Banner Smite to have a 60% chance of Sundering Defense. It's not a very good bonus. I don't know why they made their Sunder Defense bonuses so low. But with a 60% chance of Sundering Defense and only 14 damage, it's not exactly worth doing that much. Now, he does have an advantage then. He has the Defense Mode Warding, which obviously gives, as all warding defense modes, 3 resistance, 3 status resist to all allies, as well as the War Banner bonus. All friendly adjacent units get 1 defense and 1 resistance. So Bannerman in defense mode next to your other units would give them 1 defense, 4 resistance, 3 status resistance, making him make your other units pretty tanky. His special ability is on cooldown 1 and is the Soothing Standard. Target friendly unit gets 25 hit points and 10 morale, and then you enter defense mode. So far as healing abilities are concerned, this one's a pretty good one. Not healing as much as other support abilities, but being on only a 1-turn cooldown instead of the often bad 2 turns cooldown. He can heal every other turn. He can also restore morale, and again, he enters at defense mode with War Banner, so he can just sit in the back and make people pretty tanky. Overall, especially with his optional cavalry, and no real downside other than lacking 2 damage, he doesn't have any real weaknesses. I'd call him mid-tier, mid-high maybe for a support unit. Not as good as a Vow Keeper, but certainly not bad. As for spells, Feudal has... let's see, I think they have 2 spells they share and 1 they don't. Yes, okay. Their spell, their number 1 spell is Call to Glory. For 3 turns, all friendly units get 5 morale at the start of your turn. This doesn't impact the turn you cast it, and is 20 mana and 25 casting points. I would basically never cast this ever. Their other spell is called Militia. For 60 gold, not mana, gold, and 60 casting points, you can summon 2 militia in a target-owned city. This is a great way to start power clearing in the early game, or alternatively later in the game, to quickly get a second lord or hero, or sorry, a second hero, a third hero maybe. Your second hero is probably clearing with your first hero, but Your third hero probably needs some units to help start clearing the map or doing stuff. And this is a pretty good spell for that. It's not, oh my god, anymore, but I would say it's still pretty good. Their SBI is the farmstead. It's a farm with 15 food, 10 food, and then an additional 5 per adjacent farm. So far as SBIs go, this is kind of an unremarkable one. I often don't see it get built, but if you have nothing better to do, I guess you could do it. The special spell for Feudal Aristocracy is actually pretty decent. For 10 mana and 50 combat casting, you can give all units defensive masters. At the end of their turn, they enter defense mode and charge resistance. Charge resistance is pretty decent in a lot of different ways, because it means you don't take bonus charge damage, you don't lose your retaliation, you don't lose defense mode. It's just very powerful. And then entering defense mode at the end of your turn means you could hypothetically cast this at the start of your turn, run all your units into different spots, do a bunch of attacks, and get a power turn where your charge units could even charge other charge units and then still deny them being able to deny your retaliation through having charge resistance. So it's a very, for a spell that, you know, you can have just by getting your culture, I would say this is actually amongst the top ones. It's often culture bonuses you don't really want to use, but no, I would definitely cast this spell. So Call to Glory is pretty much worthless, and Hold the Line is actually fairly decent. Feudal Monarchy does have a problem where Monarch's Decree is also worthless. For 2 turns, all friendly units get the benefit of For the Monarch as though the Monarch were present. That's just 1 defense, 1 resistance, 10% damage, 10 morale. This is really not worth casting for 30 mana, 25 combat casting. I suspect originally For the Monarch was a stronger bonus, and this was a bigger deal. For it to matter at all, I think, to use this, I think it would have to be for the rest of the battle, and then you would probably see it casted. But as it is right now, I probably wouldn't cast that one either. I can't imagine that being slightly tankier is better than just casting any other combat spell. Now, the special buildings for the Feudal are just really not that good. I don't think I'm really going to go over them. I could look at, I do believe there's a website here. If you give me 1 second, I want to check. They are, yeah, they're just not very, man, where is it? Okay, I found it. There is the Retainer's Estate. Sorry, it takes me a second because I don't remember literally everything off the top of my head. All production costs of the tier 3 buildings for cultures went down to 450. Some were 750 and some were 450. They've all come down to 450, but they haven't really been buffed or nerfed. So, yeah. The Retainer's Estate, if you share a border with the Throne City or are the Throne City, you get 20 food, 10 gold, 10 city stability. Really questionably worthwhile. Often not going to get built. Yeah. The Lord's Estate is a bit better. I would actually build this one. For each level of renown the governor has, the city gets 10 food, 10 draft, 5 city stability. At level 4 renown, that's 40 draft. That's a lot of draft. So the Lord's Manor is like, okay, yes, I will build this. The other one is like, I feel like it was meant to stack or something. It's just such low bonuses. I don't really know what happened there. So the special building, yes, Feudal Aristocracy, I would say, has the better, like, miscellaneous stuff, but Feudal Monarchy, I would say, is just better overall.
Origin culture.
So then, are there any major differences in power between single player and multiplayer? Or large map, small map, anything like that? Not really. It performs about the same on every map. Even if you're playing on a very large map where you think Feudal Monarchy might do bad, their ability to reduce Imperium upkeep does give them a bit more scaling than you would think, actually. Being able to save, for example, 7 Imperium on 5 units, that's 35 Imperium a turn. Which, when you put the math out there, that math does math out to that being a considerable chunk, right? Even into the late game. What's the overall rating of the culture? So, I do have a list here. I'll spoil it here. I do have Feudal Monarchy at A tier. Very strong, very good. Feudal Aristocracy I have down here in C tier. Now, I do have Feudal Aristocracy down here in C tier because I think with all the nerfs, I think with how much weaker they've gotten, that they're still playable. All these cultures in C tier, I would definitely say if you're in C tier, you're playable, but you're often not the best choice in practically any situation. Aristocracy does have a good bonus, they do have a good city, but it is very hard to use them, especially with the nerf to knights. Their rushing has gone down. They can win games, and I will see them get played, and you can use them. Now, do remember, if we're talking in single player, you can do anything you want in single player, and you will be able to win. So don't take this as like, do not play this culture. This game is not like other games where bad stuff is like unplayably terrible, except for one guy. Except one guy. Okay, let's move on to high. Now, high as a culture. What is a theme of high? High's whole shtick is that they... What is high shtick? They awaken their people, and on the world map, they've got the awaken agenda. Now, this is one of the two... It's the only culture that's never received a rework at all. Barbarians did receive a light rework after game launch, so it's the only culture that has never been reworked at all. I suspect next expansion, they're going to be reworked, and if you're watching this video, next expansion, they probably have been reworked, and this segment of the video is pointless. But I do need to make this video at some point. So high, because if I wait and I never make this video, because I'm always like, oh, I should wait till they update this culture, and then then I need to wait, and then I need to wait, and that's why this video is now like a year and 2 cultures out of date. So high gives you nothing by default. The alignment agenda, if you're at pure good, but not good, very good, if you're at pure good, you get 25 city stability. If you're pure evil, your units start the combat in awakened state, but that will only last for 3 turns, to be clear. If you are neutral, you get 10 food, 10 production per city stability level above neutral. Now, what is the obvious problem here? When you start the game, you have nothing, because you need to be in a neutral alignment, and you need to have city stability above neutral. You will not start the game like that. You can get to there if you put the Whispering Stone in your capital, but you don't actually start there. So, unfortunately, well, let's just say I don't think very highly of high. I do think you actually technically start the game with stability, but I think by 1 population. I mean, you can start it with, like, maybe, I mean, you can do stuff to get city stability, is what I'm saying, with society traits. But reasonably, let's talk about it. Yeah, it's just high, just But the theme of high is the alignment agenda and awakening people in combat. The world map bonuses, that's it. Their alignment agenda is it. That's their entire world map bonuses. So what does this culture do uniquely? That's awakening. Now, in order to do awakening, we're going to have to talk about the spells and units of the culture. So let's just do that right now. Unfortunately, high pretty much amounts to their spells, their units, and their SPI. Their SPI being very, very important, mind you. Their scout gets greater farsight, giving him +2 vision range, or I guess her. We do get -1 damage, but it's like, who cares? I'm not sure why they get -1. It's just weird. I don't know why they did this to scouts. So greater farsight gives you more vision. It's great when your scout is good at scouting, so I would say that's one of the better bonuses. Not quite primal, but still pretty good up there. The Dusk Hunter by itself is a tier 1 archer with no actual special bonuses here. They do get hit points 55, 0 stat line, just a generic, totally generic archer. Their special effect here is Dormant Seeking Arrows. While awakened, they get +1 range. Now, I do need to describe this really quick because it's important. High is a weirdly unique culture. If they do their Dormant Enchantment and give it to any unit that is not cultural, those not cultural units will still get the dormant effects to be awakened on them, right? So if I was, for example, to get a tier 1 shield unit, I don't know, a rock elemental or something, right? They would still get Dormant Shield of Light and their unique bonuses. Whereas when I'm playing the cultural units, they only get their dormant effect. This does mean that the high culture units, other than one, generally speaking, underperform by a little bit. It's just something to keep in mind. The Dawn Defender has 75-50. Now, his unique effect is he gets 5 more HP, which, okay, cool, I guess. They do get Dormant Shield of Light. Now, what Awakened Shield of Light does is give you 1 defense, 2 resistance. Early in the game, it's not hard to keep everybody permanently awakened. So the Dawn Defender will have 75 HP, 6 defense, 2 resistance, which I would say is pretty good. And I mean, it's at least as good as, for example, the Feudal Defender at any rate. But as we get later in the game and as we start getting 6 units, it can be harder and harder to keep every unit awakened. So they start falling off a bit, but early in the game, they do pretty good. Their tier 2 support is the Sun Priest, who does 16 damage with no actual special effects here, which is kind of bad. Their Dormant Radiant Light, when they are awakened, they have a 60% chance to disrupt enemies, which is, you know, kind of a low chance and really not that impactful. They do have a passive ability here they can use every other turn. They can awaken a unit, and then they can awaken another unit adjacent, or sorry, within 2 hexes of that unit. Twin awakening, 2 awakenings. And this counts as a support ability, so if you have anything like Staves of Warding from Astral Affinity, Staves of Warding here, this will then give both units 2 bolstered resistance. So the Sun Priest, if you're trying to do tomes like that, you know, it's actually decent at that sort of thing. Mending Awakening is their heal ability. It is on cooldown 2, which is a bit rough, but it does heal 30 and awaken an ally. Other than that, they are completely vanilla. Now, worth noting here really quick is that Dormant Enchantment, if it is used on a support unit, that support unit will get the basic version of Awaken, where a unit, it will then be able to, on a cooldown 1, be able to awaken an ally. Now, this is notable because this does mean High can use other support units and kind of use them to also awaken allies. The downside, of course, is that High can't really awaken enough people once they stop using their tier 2 support, but we'll get to that in a second. Their other tier 2 unit is the Daylight Spear, 83-2. Now, he does get +1 resistance for, that's it, that's his whole bonus, which is a decent bonus, but it's sure not that great. They do get Dormant Guardian, which means that they get +1 retaliation attack when awakened. So, with the awakened effect, and I have never mentioned, and I should definitely mention here, what the awakened effect does is give you 3 spirit damage, doubled on single shots. So if you ever awaken anyone, they get 3 spirit damage. High opens with that, and they do open with a good chunk of spirit damage then. Certainly about as good as Oathsworn at game start, better than Architects. It will eventually get outscaled, it will eventually be hard to do, and most frustratingly will be a lot of tedious micromanagement in battles that I don't think anybody actually wants to do. Other than that, the Daylight Spear is a solid tier 2 spear unit. Tier 2 spear units tend to be the only tier 2s worth building because spears are still pretty good, but he probably could be a bit better, especially with the new Dark Culture. I suspect next expansion, High will get reworked and they'll be buffed a lot. If not next expansion, then the one after that. Either rate, Daylight Spear will probably be better in the future. Now, the only cultural High unit that people use to any seriousness is the Awakener. Now, one large reason for this is the Awakener has awakened. They can keep themselves permanently woke, and being permanently woke is obviously a good thing for this culture. 75-1-3. By default, they have Spirit Bolts, which does 16 damage, which I believe is... Oh, the Arcanist is low damage. Where can I see? Yeah, that's on par with other units. So by default, the Awakener is average damage. They do have the special ability, Exposing Light. Now, this is why people like this unit. Exposing Light deals damage in a 1 hex radius, inflicting automatic Sunder Defense and Sunder Resistance. This means if you use Exposing Light on an enemy 2 or even 3 times in a row, they will be sundered heavily and take significantly more damage. Being that it is an AoE, if 2 or even 3 enemies are clumped up, or maybe help them 4 or 5, it will absolutely shred them. Exposing Light then completely... Effectively, you cannot clump up. Sometimes you can clump up against mages because you have so much resistance, but you will not have so much resistance if you're fighting exposing light. So you do have to stay split up. They still have dormant radiant light. That just means you get a 60% chance to distract enemies on your base attacks. That doesn't affect exposing light because it's magic. It's a bit weird, but yeah. So then why do people even play high if I've kind of just talked crap about them the whole time? High has one good thing, and that is the Sun Shrine. This culture starts with a Research SPI default. Research SPIs are obviously the premier SPI in the entire game, Special Province Improvement, because they give lots of research. By default, it will give 5 more knowledge than a regular research post, so you're just getting 5 for building it. Then you get an additional 3 per adjacent research post. So if you were to put this next to maybe 2, if you had 2 magic, or I should have mana crystal next to a magic material maybe, you could get a good chunk of 11 more knowledge than a normal province improvement. It's pretty good, and it will proc 10 extra knowledge on the Scholars Guild, which will mean then that you get a lot more knowledge as you get later and later to the game. This is pretty much the one good thing about high. Now, they do have a pretty decent combat spell. Not amazing, but decent enough in Warding Blessing. For 10 mana, 15 combat casting, target friendly unit heals 20 temporary hit points and gets 2 bolstered resistance. It's okay. The new Primal spell, in the way it works, I should say, Primal is definitely power creep this a little bit, but if this, I mean, this wouldn't take much to be good. Maybe 25 and 30 HP would be fine. Otherwise, I mean, it's just a healing spell, and it's always good to have healing spells, right? What high also does good is they can give their cultural bonuses to all units, including mythics now. That is actually fairly decent. So, for example, if a unit is a mythic, they get Dormant Shield of Light. So while they are woke, they get 1 defense and 2 resistance, including that 3 spirit damage. So, ironically, high mythics, funny enough, are some of the best units in the game while they're woke compared to other cultures. Maybe not on the level of full late game. Actually, no, I'd say they're still better. Yeah, high mythics are actually better than architects, so long as you can keep them woke, but it's hard. It's hard to keep everybody woke. Okay. Everything else about them is, I mean, you got awaken, friendly units in 1 hex radius become awakened. If already awakened, it becomes strengthened. That, in the most blunt way possible, that is really not that good. Now, high culture. What is their cultural building? I don't remember it. Man, it's like I need to always find these. I have a website. I do not remember every single building. If I was an editor, I would edit these parts out. I don't remember this one being so notable. I wish there was a website that just told me all of these. Yeah, this one, I mean, there's a couple that are obviously very good. The high one. Okay, high has the, yeah, high is a soul. There we go. Okay, so I found a way I can find these very easily. High is a solar nexus. You get 5 city stability per research post or per conduit. Now, as we did mention earlier, if we compare this to, for example, the Lord's Manor, it's a bit of a blowout. It only gives city stability and only per research post and conduit, and it costs 450 production. So unless we're talking super late game, if you have like a 9 research SPI city, I don't think anybody is building this one, unfortunately.
What is the origin culture?
Oops, wrong button. So then, does it have any major differences in power between single player, multiplayer, large map, small map? You know, let me do this. I think that's a better way to word it, depending on the map. No, not really. It performs about well early game. It performs decently late game. Awakened mythics are fine. It does fall off a little bit, so the larger the map you play, the worse it'll do. But it does, a research SPI would help some out a lot. What is the overall rating of the culture? I put them at B tier. They're not quite worthless yet. I wouldn't say they get outperformed by their cultures. They still do have one unique aspect. But they're definitely going down in the tier over time. I suspect they'll be buffed. And I should say, what does this culture do uniquely? They have a research SPI. There's not many cultures that do that, and that does make them more powerful. Moving on to architects. what is the theme of architects? Architects scale. They go late game and they get the most damage and the most defense in the game if they reach late game. They did get nerfed a little bit after launch. They toned them down a little bit and tried to balance them. A lot of people got angry that they tried to balance architects. Unfortunately, an entire culture being an I win button was seen as bad for the game. I would say they're still outrageously strong. The whole thing with architects is you need lots of production, you need to build a lot, and then they will be very, very strong. What are the world map bonuses of this culture? By default, architect doesn't really get many world map bonuses, but they do get some of them that are very much worth noting. They get Wonderstone on the world map, which they use to build monuments. Monuments need to be built, but once you do build your monuments, they will boost that city a little bit. You need to build a tier 1 monument, and then it does nothing. Then you need to build a tier 2 monument in your city. Only that city gets 20 stability. At a tier 3 monument, you get that stability and 10 food production draft income. At a tier 3 monument, tier 4 monument, you get 10% to all income in that city, including knowledge, which I would say is pretty good. You then also, and I don't think it's listed here, depending on what affinity you've chosen, you will then get resistance to whatever you've dedicated that monument to, Order, Chaos, Astral, Materium, Nature, Shatter. Whatever you dedicated it to, you will then get resistance. So it will be Spirit resistance, Fire resistance, Lightning resistance, Physical resistance, Blight resistance, or Cold. Is it called Cold? I swear to God, if you guys have watched my videos, how often do I not remember? I think it's called Cold. Frost damage, maybe? Is it Frost? I think it's Frost. Frost damage. No, it's Cold. So you can only stack your incarnate affinity to 5, but depending on how many monuments you built, you can continue to get more and more resistances. So for example, if you're fighting demons, you know they'll be doing lots of fire damage, and you get a monument dedicated to fire, you will get fire resistance, which is quite powerful as time goes on. So then, what does Affinity Incarnate do? You will start the game with 1 Affinity Incarnate, which gives you 1 damage of each damage type, depending on what your highest affinity is. As you build your monument up, your tier 4 monument or 4 tier 1 monuments will get you to 5 Affinity Incarnate. 5 Affinity Incarnate will then bring you to 5 damage. 5 damage is considered pretty good. It's the highest damage you can get in the game, other than specifically a 100% crit Barbarian on a unit built in a city with a Shrine of the War God, which is to say, for the most part, the highest damage in the game. Other than that, that's about it. Architects like to build, and then they get big bonuses for building. What do they do uniquely? Uniquely, they are the best late game culture. With the damage bonus now applying to mythic units and being able to give mythic units resistances, this means that late game architects are quite difficult to beat. If you know that you might be fighting demons or spirits, you could get fire resist because you will be taking spirit damage from pretty much everything coming out of the order side. If you know you're fighting demons, you could go with physical resist, or you could go with fire resist, so on like that. They can also generate the most affinity in the game, which allows them to fast track the Empire affinity track, allowing them to get to maybe high tier order, high tier astral before anybody else, and get some of the buffs on that one. Then what are the spells and units of the culture? The spells and the units of the culture are pretty strong, and one of them in particular is why I think this culture will be rated much higher than you might think. So the surveyor is their scout. Now all he needs to do is run around and survey for materials. He surveys for materials, and you can survey each magic material at once, and once you do so, you get Wonderstone. So you do want some scouts, and you do want them running around the map. By default, they do 10 magic damage instead of 8. Once again, I don't know why. I don't know why scouts have such differences here. He does get Affinity Incarnate, so he gets a little bit more damage as well. Not a lot, but a little bit. Reasonably, you can try to pull their scout in. He'll contribute slightly more damage than other scouts, but you really just want them running around the map surveying for materials. Now, whereas all other cultures get a tier 2 support, the architects get a tier 1 support and a tier 3 support. Both their supports are pretty good. The tier 1 support has a 16 damage nuke with no special effects, but they do have Cultivate Affinity. They link to an ally, and then when the second they link, they dispel one negative effect, and then every turn thereafter, the target permanently gets 2 Affinity Incarnate. I should mention that while linked, they just get the 2 Affinity Incarnate. That doesn't stack. You just get 2, and then it's 2 forever. But at the start of every turn, both units heal for 10 and dispel one negative effect. This means that you're giving damage to a friendly, or potentially with a spell I'll show you later, making them much tankier. You're giving damage to somebody, or you are healing, or you're dispelling. It's a pretty good unit, and especially because now they get 2 Affinity Incarnate, that will give them 4 damage extra. So this does mean that the Cultivator, for being a support, is kind of more of a combat support than a healing support. They're like a mix in between the two. I think the developers lately have liked making supports more of like a mixed combat role, kind of like if you guys ever play Overwatch, it's like Mercy that really likes to use their gun a lot, right? Okay, so Earthbreaker is one of their shock units. It's not really that good of a shock unit. It has some buffs, it has some debuffs. They're not literally the worst shock unit in the game, but they could certainly be better. But they do have some unique aspects to them that makes them still decent enough. They have 75 HP, 3 defense, 0 resistance, so it's 1 more defense than regular. Their special ability is Sweeping Charge. Now, as compared to other charge abilities, this is not single shot, so the damage on this ability will scale very poorly. The advantage is it will deal damage to all adjacent targets to the enemy for 20% of its damage, allowing you to proc AoE debuffs or anything that you've enchanted onto the unit. It will also cancel all retaliations on all enemies, making it decent for defending range units. Now, the main aspect that makes this unit still decent is that after using Sweeping Charge, it will enter defense mode. So, as overall, just a reasonably tanky unit, because we're looking at 75 HP, 3-0, enters defense mode on charge, bring it to 5-2 on charge, at the very least about on par with where a shield unit is. It also gets Incarnate Fortitude, so each stack of Affinity Incarnate you have, it gets 5 HP. So that'll be 5 to 25 HP, bringing it at the start of the game, you have 80, actually. I lied a little bit, you have 80 HP, and at the end of the game, you'll have 100 HP. So the Earthbreaker is a bit different from any other shock unit. I think if Sweeping Charge did a little bit more damage in the cone, maybe 50% more, I'd like it a bit more. On that, it's a fine unit. The unit that makes Architects so broken is the Guardian. On his face value, he's not really anything notorious, but once you analyze how he actually works, you'll see why this unit single-handedly breaks the game. Being a unit with 80 HP, 5 defense, 2 resistance, as a tier 2 shield unit, he gives up 1 defense for 1 resistance. Not anything game-breaking, and really along the lines of all other tier 2 units is not really even being that good. His melee strike is 10, so he actually has 2 less damage than other units of his tier. Affinity Incarnate will give him the 1 damage that it does to any other unit. First Strike, now that's because he's using a spear. He doesn't have charge resist, but he does get First Strike. That's all that means, it just gives him First Strike. He has Incarnate Retaliation. Adjacent attackers, not melee attackers, but anybody adjacent to you, will take 1 damage per stack of Affinity Incarnate you have if they deal damage to you. And then it just is a regular shield unit. So what breaks this unit so hard is Incarnate Disruption. Adjacent enemy units suffer -1 damage type resistance associated with each stack of Infinity Incarnate on this unit. The way defenses work in this game is that removing defenses from your enemies gives you magnifying multiplicative damage, which is to say if you remove 1 defense, it's worse than if you remove 2 defense, is worse than if you remove 3 defense in a scaling way. Every single defense that you remove from an enemy, I shouldn't say defense, but resistance, defensive stat, every defensive stat you remove from an enemy is worth more the more you remove from them. Incarnate Disruption, even in the early game with only 2 pyramids, will be -3 resistance for an enemy. If you have 2 Guardians next to an enemy, even in the early game, that would be -6 resistance. This would make the Guardian, despite his -2 damage, blatantly the highest damage unit in the entire game, at least at tier 2. By tier 3, he's still likely the highest damage unit, and it takes until tier 4 and tier 5 for him to start even being comparable to other units. Even as we do reach the late game, having even a couple Guardians in your stacks, because they do stack and you can get up to -5 resistance on enemies, putting -10 resistance on an enemy allows you to delete them from existence. You can use this, of course, with any damage type, and you can give your weapons that damage type on your heroes, on your lord. You can use the damage type. For example, there are units who do mostly spirit or all fire, and you can just make enemies outrageously squishy at the end of the day. This just breaks the Guardian, and for a tier 2 unit who can reach a lot of veterancy early in the game, and with the buffs that shield units have gotten, it just makes the Guardian an absolute menace. The Shademaker is our other tier 2 unit, being a ranged unit. It has only a couple unique effects on it, completely generic tier 2 range stat line. One of those effects is that it does -2 damage to have Giant Slayer. Now, all range units did get +2 damage, so you might look at this and say, well, that's not -2. I assure you that is actually -2. And the Giant Slayer means you do 40% more damage against large targets. There are far more large targets than you would think in the game. So overall, on a tier 2 unit, it might not be a good trade-off. It might be a good trade-off. It's really hard to tell. If you build too many Shademakers, you won't have enough large targets to hit. But there are a lot of large targets in this game. Their special ability is Incarnate Shot. You fire in a 1-hex radius, and for every stack of Affinity Incarnate you have, an enemy has a 90% chance to be weakened. Now, that's not, for example, a 90% chance to weaken them 4 times. It's a 90% chance 4 times in a row if you have 4 Affinity Incarnate. That's far more consistent, far more reliable, and if you do get multiple Shademakers, can be a good way to totally weaken enemies out of the game. Being a range unit, it is a bit squishy. You do need to keep it alive, but the Shademaker that you start the game with, I would generally keep around. I try to keep it alive because these units do scale pretty decently overall. Incarnate Shot is not considered base though, unfortunately, so it's a bit hard to enchant it to do more damage. Their tier 3 unit is also really, really good. This is the Architect. Having a typical tier 3 support unit stat line, it doesn't seem to do anything too great. It is an optional cavalry unit. I haven't mentioned that all the time, but you guys can see that. Now, what makes this unit so great is all of these abilities it has. Every single one of them is amazing. The first ability is Magic Blast, doing 20 damage and having automatic sunder and automatic sunder again on every hit. That's not a percent chance, that is automatic. That's a lot of damage that enemies will start taking if multiple Architects hit them. If only 2 Architects hit an enemy, I've managed to kill otherwise tanky lords, just because, again, reducing enemy defensive stats is extremely high damage. For example, if you reduce it twice, they're taking 21% more damage than they would otherwise. It is very good. Their first ability here is Conjure Tesseract. Now it's order, materium, nature. I can't change how it's listed here, but it'll be of whatever. Now this Tesseract, I cannot see it in like the unit browser, so we just need to look at it here. It is a tower, but it will get Battle Mage enchantments. Once you summon it onto the field, it will have 3 AP, so it can attack 3 times. This means you summon it onto the field at range, and then attacks another enemy at range, hits 4 times. It does pretty decent damage. It also has a decent chunk of HP at 40. Not amazing, but it will probably take at least 1 solid hit to bring down. Now that Tesseract does have 4 range, so you can summon it at 4 range, then it can shoot at 4 range. This gives the Architect a lot of reach, it gives it a lot of power, and it does mean that the Architect of the Architect faction is a pretty strong unit. But I did say every single ability here was good. That includes Incarnate Restoration. Target friendly unit heals 20 hit points, then an additional 20 plus a stack of regeneration for each affinity incarnate the caster has. That means right at the start of the game it heals 40 with regeneration, and at the end of the game it heals 120 with 5 regeneration. That's pretty good. The Architect, though, does have a 2 cooldown on that heal, but that heal is pretty much a full heal for the vast majority of the game. So the Architect is just a very He's a very damaging support, but he's also a very good support. He's just a very aggressive support. I would probably call him the best support in the game. I would say he even outperforms the Oracle if you're trying to use supports to be a little bit more aggressive. So the unit roster for the Architects is a bit weighted. We do have the most broken unit in the game, and we do have an outrageously good support, but the Earthbreaker is not too good. The Shademaker's fine. And the Cultivator's decent enough, I would say. It's a decent enough unit. I think the high damage on their basic attack, they're a bit more aggressive. You have to use Cultivators. Maybe if you have a Warrior Lord or something like that, they do pretty good there. Now, what spells do the Architects have? They have Incarnate Mark, which can give Incarnate Mark to anyone. Again, I'll keep mentioning it because it's new, so some of you guys might not understand it. The Incarnate Mark does now also apply to Mythic units, so the Architects can buff Mythic units a lot, which is very, very strong. Conjure Elemental is a combat spell for 20 mana, 25 combat casting. You can summon a tier 1 Lesser Light Spirit based on your Empire's dominant affinity. This is a pretty good combat spell. It definitely can be used to pump mana into battle wins, or mana into not losing anything in battles. I do believe it is working now and even works in auto battle really well. So even if you're not playing out battles, if you have lots of mana, you can just feed mana into battle wins really easily. So it's not quite as strong as the Primal Summon, but it is also a bit less to cast than the Primal Summon. So a bit of a trade-off, better in the early game, worse in the mid game. Resilient Incarnation is a spell that gives 1 defense, 1 resistance, an additional defense and resistance per stack of Affinity Incarnate. For a mere 10 mana, 15 combat casting, this is pretty good. Now, you can use this in even the early game, once you have like, if you have nothing, it's still 2 defense, 2 resistance, which is not great, but fine. Later in the game, it'll probably be somewhere, if you have like a 3 stack of a pyramid, we're talking 4 defense, 4 resistance. That's pretty good. In the super late game, where once you have a 5 stack of pyramid, you're gonna get 6 defense, 6 resistance. If you have a cultivator attached to that unit, 8 defense, 8 resistance. This is not able to be dispelled, so this will stick permanently. Any unit with resilient incarnation not being hit by a piercing or breaching person will basically take no damage. Being that the pyramid is already a special province improvement, instead the Architects get the Affinity Effigies. Effigies for the Monument. This city grants 20 food, 10 gold, and 10 mana, but it takes Wonder Dust, or whatever that thing is called, Wonderstone. I wouldn't really recommend using it. It's not really that great. They already have a building that is what I would call a pretty good building that you would definitely want to use instead. The Affinity Obelisk. For each tier of monument built in the Empire, not in the city, the whole Empire, you get 10 food, 10 stability. Now you see this is no good in the early game, but if you build this in the mid game, this is an easy way. If you have literally no stability in any of your tomes or in anything, you can easily, even at a tier 4 monument, 40 food, 40 stability. It's worth building. It is worth building a bit later in the game where food is generally not going to be very good, but it can be a way also if you have a new city or, kind of like a mid-tier city and you wanted to get up to that 16 population size, it can be a good way to get there. So this is not like, oh my god, the best, but it's definitely not the worst. One thing that is also very strong, and the last thing about Architects, is the unique building that they have. Every culture has a unique building, and they've all been buffed to no longer lose any resources for the resources they gain, but the one that the Architects get, I would say, is uniquely strong. That's because it gives you knowledge and production. Every city is going to want this as it replaces the library, and then every city will also want this as it replaces the building after your library, the Arcane Institute. So to finally wrap up here with Architects, do they have any major differences in power depending on the map? Yes, obviously. If you play on a very large map, Architects will continue to scale and get completely out of control. If you play on smaller maps, then they will not get time to scale and will not do very well. It's really just that simple. What's the overall rating of the culture? Right now I'd call Architects one of the S-tier cultures, but there is a bit of an asterisk here. The Guardian holds up a lot of that power himself, and the map size holds up a lot of that power. Even with the Guardian being as strong as he is, if you are playing a small map, they will obviously just not do as well as other cultures. If you are playing a medium map with the Guardian unit, they will probably still do pretty good. If you're playing a large map, they will start being very overbearing. If you're playing very large, there's really no way to beat them in a fair fight other than... This takes us finally to Oathsworn. What is the theme of this culture? The theme, the idea, is to keep and build your oath. How you do that depends on which of the different oaths you take. There's righteousness, strife, and the bad one, which I'll increasingly make fun of as we continue to go over here. What are the world map bonuses of this culture? They're not very large, but they are decently strong. Not amazing, but decent. If you build your way up to an adherent, all your cities gain 10 stability. If you're a devotee, that's 20, and if you're a paragon, that's 40. So this culture doesn't really have to worry about stability and can keep their city stable without much effort. What does this culture do uniquely? Well, the different oaths and how you build them vary a lot. I'll have to go through them one at a time. Righteousness is built by the Oath of Righteousness. This is not a very complicated one. If you have evil alignment, then you lose devotion, and if you have good alignment, then you gain devotion. It's the easiest one, it's the simplest one. You get pure good, and that makes you good. Although I should mention, you do need to be 120 good, so you need to be more good than pure good in order to fulfill your entire oath. Let the religious people philosophize on that one. So what does this oath then do that's so strong? Well, depending on your oath, you get damage. Now, this is also, I should say, this only applies to non-flanking attacks. You must hit them from the front, which does make it a bit weaker than Strife, but it is decently strong still on its own. Once you start the game, you already are at 2 spirit damage, then 3, 4, and 5. If you break your oath, you get negative 20% damage, but you should obviously not be breaking your oath. Now, Strife, on the other hand, has the Oath of Strife, which grants you Warrior's Soul, granting you 2, 3, 4, 5 fire damage. Pretty simple, right? But what is the Oath of Strife? Well, this one's a bit more complicated, of course. You build the Oath of Strife by entering wars, by raising a city, by not letting enemies rout in combat, meaning you have to run them down and kill them before they rout. If you get an event, you can also run them down and kill them to not lose oath. If you win any battle, you get 2, and if you win a battle with lower army power, you get 4. You lose your devotion by entering a truce, that's ending a war, getting a defensive pact, or getting an alliance. Also making any pact of vassalage or losing a city. So the Oath of Strife has to play in one very specific way. They cannot take vassals, even on free cities. They must raise everything. They must kill everyone. They must enter war. It is very easy to be very high devotion, but it is very easy to screw over your devotion or find yourself in a free-for-all map in a very awkward setting. So that one's pretty strong. Now, compared to Righteousness, Strife does have an actual buff. Righteousness gets double negative alignment. So if you get negative 10, you would actually get negative 20. So Righteousness actually doesn't get any buffs. Strife, on the other hand, does get buffs. Their first buff is rulers with an overall better better ranking, you get 25 grievances against them, making it significantly easier to declare war. Raising cities and pillaging provinces takes -1 turn, which you can imagine is pretty strong. Raising cities and pillaging provinces yields 6 Imperium. I think it's 6. It's not a whole lot. It might be 5, maybe 3. I don't know. It's a decent chunk of Imperium, but it's not like, oh my god. Pillaging an entire city is not going to reward you more than like 60 tops. Culture units then get the Warrior's Soul, which, as you've seen, is the damage. So Strife gets pretty good buffs. Righteousness is like the same thing. They're a bit more fluid with how they can conduct their diplomacy, though. This takes us to Harmony, and why I said there's the really good one, the good one, and the bad one. Why is Harmony so bad? Really easy to see. Cultural units have Harmonize. When this unit drops below 60% of their maximum hit points, they get an effect based on this culture's devotion. Ooh, good. They heal 30, 20, 10, 5. Wait, this is useless. I don't really have much more to say. That is so bad. For a culture that is otherwise all about dealing colossal damage very early in the game, I mean, not super early, but like mid-game colossal damage, this one doesn't deal damage. They also do the Oath of Harmony, which is also weirdly difficult to do. You gain devotion by having a city or vassal of another race, clearing an infestation or ancient wonder, or making a truce or forgiving a grievance. You lose devotion by ever declaring a war, raising or migrating, or fabricating a grievance. Harmony is, well, I mean, it is harmony, but it is quite difficult to win games with this culture. They don't really give you much in the way of trying to win on research or expansion, but also you can't really declare wars because then you will screw over your devotion. So it's kind of awkward to play Harmony, and it's also very bad. Now, they do get 100 relations with free cities and rulers, and when vassalizing a conquered city, they start at vassalage instead of tributary, which I guess it is a bonus, but I mean, look at this bonus, right? Okay. So, what are these spells and units of the culture? And this is where the culture is going to start excelling a bit more. Number one, let's go over the spells, because I think the spells and buildings will tell more of a story here. Oathsworn Harmony gets, well, all of them get counterstands, which, sorry, friendly units in a 1 hex radius gain for 1 turn, first strike, and extra retaliation, and defensive masters. So at the end of your turn, you enter into defense mode. That's a pretty powerful spell at 1 mana, 10 combat casting. If you're in the early game, counterstance is outrageously good at making your melee units be able to beat the crap out of their enemies. Being able to double retaliate against enemies and being in defense mode means that even trying to attack you in a one-on-one will mean you win. You can spam counterstance and pretty much dominate combat, especially with a Warrior Lord. Devout Radiance deals 10 spirit damage in a 1 hex radius, which isn't too amazing, but the damage is boosted based on your devotion to, I believe, 30 or 40. It doesn't actually say here. I think it's about 30. So a 30 damage AoE for 10 mana that you get off your culture, that is also really good. You also get these schools, but the schools vary depending on what you have. Harmony gets the School of Contemplation, giving you 7 mana, 7 knowledge, and 3 knowledge per adjacent conduit or research post. It's decent, I would say. Gives you 2 more mana, 7 more knowledge than a normal conduit, which isn't bad. Oathsworn Righteousness gets a special conduit with 7 mana, 7 draft, and 7 drafts per adjacent quarry. It is a source of draft, which could be helpful, but not really that good. Oathsworn Strife gets the best one. You might be noticing a pattern here. They get 7 mana, 7 draft, and all units produced in the city start with 1 extra unit rank, which does stack, of course, with all other unit ranks. Oathsworn Strife stay winning. Now, as for the units of the culture, Oathsworn does have some pretty solid units that they can use here. Well, I suppose we ought to mention the different buildings that they can do. Which one is Oathsworn? The Paragon Quarter. The Paragon Quarter is kind of worth going over, but kind of not. It's 450 production to give you 20 stability, and then any fight in that domain adds their tier 3 unit to that fight. It's okay. Like, I would build it ever. Like, there are situations where I would build this, but it's definitely not one of the top tiers. It's not one of the top echelons, right? Okay, so Oathsworn units. We've got the Wayfarer, that's their scout, who does less damage. Again, I'm not really sure why, to be honest. They have Retreat Expert, they retreat from a battle, and they will never die from retreating, and it will always be 2 turns faster. So Oathsworn can use Wayfarers to pillage. At least if you're Strife, you can spam pillage with Wayfarers, and they will be quite annoying and keep coming back to the fight. So that's pretty tedious for enemies to deal with. Other than that, I mean, it's a scout that's not very good at being a scout, other than, I guess, in the mid-game sitting in locations and making your enemies have to kill them constantly. The Sworn Guard is a tier 1 spearman that is firmly in the okay territory. They have 75 HP, 2 defense, 0 resistance. Their melee strike is a 60% chance of sundering. Eat your heart out, archer and longbow. So that's not too bad. They do 40% more damage to cavalry and large units, being a polearm with charge resistance. Other than that, it's just a generic polearm unit. Not remarkable, not even very good. The Honor Blade is a tier 1 fighter with 70 HP, 3 defense, 1 resistance, which is a good bit better. Now they get that because of the high maintenance. Their melee strike is no special modifiers, but their defensive strike is a 1 AP cooldown 2 ability that does a lot of damage with a base melee single shot and then puts you in defense mode. Honor Blade is basically a charge unit on crack with a triple attack. Now they don't get the 60% bonus damage from charge. That is actually quite relevant early in the game. So they will frequently do only similar levels of damage to charge units. Charge units will actually slightly outperform them on that 60% charge if they have an enchantment or some boost or something. But actually, that'll do more than slightly outperform them. It'll outperform them by, maybe up to 4 damage. Anyway, defensive strike is just a good way to get them into range, and being their decent defensive stats, entering into defense mode after the attack is, a pretty good way to just tank through enemies and set up to get your melee strike. So overall, it's a pretty good unit. It's definitely not as good as it used to be, simply because other tier 1 units have been buffed. It used to be like one of the few actually good tier 1 units, but now there's a good choice of tier 1 units to choose from. So the Honor Blade is not, in my opinion, some premier hyper great one. The Seal Bearer does change depending on what harmony, right? It changes depending on if you're righteousness, harmony, or strife. Depends on your oath, right? But the general idea here is it does 12 damage on hit and cannot miss against enemies with Seal of Transference. That's okay damage, I guess. Being a tier 2 battle mage, it gets the premier terrible stats of 5502. Battle mages might be a little bit too squishy. Just a thought. So this unit will die very, very, very easily. Its special ability is Transference Soul. At 6 range, always hits. You do 30 damage, or if you're strife, you only do 20. And you apply an effect on the enemy. The Seal of Transference gives you 5 hit points, or I should say gives other allies 5 hit points if they hit the target that you've put the seal on. The Resonance Seal does 4 extra damage if an ally hits a target, and the Strife Seal makes them take 10 damage at the start of their turn. And if the unit explodes, it explodes, dealing 20 fire damage to adjacent units. Weirdly, the Fire Seal does 10 less damage to make up for dealing 10 damage, but then has no other special effects other than the explosion. So it's overall, this is just not a remarkable unit. I'm going to use that term a lot, remarkable. This is just not a remarkable unit. I would very rarely ever use it. That takes us to the Vowkeeper, who is the premier, the best support unit for tier 2, I would say, in the game. What is so good about the Vowkeeper? Well, with 61-3 stats here, we don't really see anything out of the line, but their Purging Blast, for having -2 damage, automatically removes 1 positive status effect from the enemy. As you can imagine, there are many ways you can use this to completely screw over enemies, including removing Steadfast or stacks of Bolster or Strengthened. It's just a very good way to have a support unit that on their damage turns can do a lot. The other abilities are the Vow of Purification, which is a full cleanse plus 3 status protection, making it a better cleanse on cooldown 1. Pretty strong ability, that. Vow of Healing is an AoE heal for 25. Maybe not as strong as the War Shaman, but at range 4, it's actually, I believe the War Shaman, unless... No, War Shaman is also range 4, but it's a really good ability. And being that it is on a culture that loves to be able to kill enemies, having a Vowkeeper that can AoE heal and cleanse all on 1 unit package is just very useful to have in the backline. Now, every culture does get their own unique cultural unit. You have the very good one, the good one, and the bad one. I'm not exaggerating, this is just kind of how it is. The very good one is the Warbound. Now, this unit has 100 HP, 4 defense, 2 resistance. With a mere 4 movement speed, you might be wondering why I call them very good. I call all 4 move shock units bad. For the most part, at least the ones that are tier 3 and above, right? So why is this one doing good? He has Flaming Charge Strike, which instead of getting a 60% damage boost, gets a 5 damage boost. If you have lots of percent damage on this unit, it does pretty good. If you don't have lots of percent damage on this unit, then this will kind of actually overall reduce your damage. So it really depends on how you're using the unit, right? His special ability, and the reason why he's so good, is Bulldoze. You move 4 hexes forward, enemies in the way sustain damage, and you leave 1 AP. As you can imagine, this is a lot of mobility. This allows you to run past enemies, ignore shield lines, ignore terrain, generally be a terror on the battlefield. Warbounds basically cannot be kept from their target. You can't outspace them, you can't outzone them. They will get to where you want, and they will hit who you want. It's really strong. At the Paragon level, they get the Infernal Blaze ability, which you will generally just use on the first turn of combat. It gives you 3 Infernal Might. Enemy units sustain damage. It is melee, it is magic. I would very much like if the developers just removed the magic part of all these abilities and made it melee. Maybe even melee base, but at the very least melee alone. Now, the problem with melee magic is whichever is higher, defense or resistance, it will use that. So this is not a way to bypass defense. If they have high defense, it'll hit their defense. If they have high resistance, it'll just hit the resistance. So the main thing here is you get 3 stacks of Infernal Might. With the Tome of the Warlord giving Infernal Might so easy, this has definitely gotten to be less useful than it was in the past. But even with Tome of the Warlord, it is a good way to get Infernal Might at the start of the battle, which is when it's most useful for a charge unit. So pretty good ability, good damage, good self-buffing. All you really need to do is get him some percent damage modifiers and he'll be good to go. The Avenger is very similar and yet different. Same stat line, same 4 movement speed. The reason the Warbound is very good, and the Avenger, I wouldn't even call very good. I wouldn't call him good. I would call him average. He's like an average tier 4 shock unit. Better than the Barbarian Berserker, but not very good on his own. What is bad then about the Avenger? Well, it's just that 4 movement speed. It's really hard to work around that on a shock unit, but he does have some decent abilities. Charge Strike is just a regular Charge Strike, and then there is Helm Splitter. Helm Splitter is a melee-based single-shot 50 damage ability that ignores 50% of your opponent's defense. Very high damage, but it is 3 AP. The general idea then is you charge up to an enemy, and then Helm Splitter if they dare stay in melee with you. A pretty decent ability that is obviously worth using, but hard to make use of. It can definitely crush shield lines if you get this unit in a pinch. At the Paragon level, they get Radiant Slash. Once again, really wish it was just melee base and not melee magic. This has been nerfed a lot, which is why I definitely need to bring this down. I would say in the past, I would definitely call this a good unit. I would say it's now an average unit, and a lot of that is Radiant Slash. Radiant Slash used to automatically blind enemies, which had really good synergy with piercing, but not only does piercing no longer stack, meaning you can't use Tome of Shades, blind an enemy, and get 100% damage pen, but it doesn't even blind to begin with anymore. In fact, it sunders resistance. Well, as I mentioned, it will use, being a melee magic ability, it will use whichever is lower, resistance or defense. So if you, in the past, Radiant Slashed enemies a bunch of times, you could do a lot of damage. Well, now it doesn't, because it'll just keep using their defense if you lower their resistance. You see the problem here. So it is 25 damage, it is melee, but it's not base, so it doesn't scale on a lot of different effects. Overall, in the past, this ability was absolutely strong. Now it's merely okay. It's worth using, and that's about the best thing I can say about it. This brings us to the Peace Bringer, who does not bring me peace to my mind. Being a tier 3 range unit is automatically mounted with 6 movement speed, which is decent enough, you'd imagine. Typical tier 3 range unit stat line, 8522. Shoot bow has no effects on it whatsoever. We do have the line shot ability at 3 range. It will hit enemies in a 3 hex line. This will mean it technically has 5 range. Being a missile and not a missile base effect, you will find this difficult to scale. There are some effects which will scale it, but again, you will find them difficult to find. Additional to that, well, let's get to its special ability here. The special ability at the Paragon level is the Arrow of Harmony, doing 40 damage. You would think this is pretty good, being Missile Magic Single Shot. It is single shot, so it gets that double scaling, but it's not base, so it's actually hard to scale. Once again, being missile and magic, it will use whichever is higher, defense or resistance. Target unit sustains damage and has a 120% chance of becoming pacified. If the enemy doesn't have cleanse, this can be a pretty diabolical way to mess with them. If they do have cleanses, then this can be a way to make them try to cleanse, but it's not a lot of damage. Overall, I would say the main issue is just that their main nuke, line shot, although you would think that this unit would be pretty good for having mobility and running around, the problem with line shot is the only real ways to scale it are Tome of Zeal, Tome of Calamity, and Tome of the Horde, I think. You could get this to do decent damage, but you'd have to avoid some tomes. You could definitely get it up there, though. It is some way. It's just janky, because you can't use any of the arrow enchantments. You can't use any of that stuff. So the Peacebringer, I would just say, not very good. So their spells, very good. Their units are pretty good if you're Righteousness or Strife. If you're Harmony, absolutely not. Are there any major differences in power depending on the map? Not really. They're not the greatest late game culture, so if you're playing on like very large maps, they won't do as well, but I would definitely not call this culture the sort of culture that does poorly in the late game. They're not the best late game culture, but they're certainly not poor in the late game. Okay, that takes us to Nomads. Now, Nomads are the most unique culture in the game. Nomads are so unique, in fact, that it might take me a while to describe them. They're the newest culture, and they're the most creative and different culture. Playing Nomads is very fun, and a lot of people really do like playing Nomads, but they're also very, very difficult to play properly, I might say. So, the theme of the culture is that they have moving cities. They have moving cities that move around the map, and then instead of staying in one place and just harvesting one thing, they move around and they over-harvest. Now, what is over-harvesting? And this is going to play, while describing the culture, I'm going to describe the world map bonuses at the same time. When they over-harvest a node, it brings that node into the city. So, for example, if you are harvesting a 10 production node for 10 turns, then it will pull that into your city. And then it's no longer on the world map, it's now in your city. So then when you move to the next area, you continue to keep that node with you, which is pretty good. The downsides of this is that you get negative, well, you take 50% more food to gain a population. Now, that doesn't technically mean that you take 50% more. It means that you probably get about a 33% food penalty. That's due to each food population being a bit more. It's typical that Nomad cities will be down 2-3 population on other cities, but it is something that you can kind of work around to at least get them into a decent space. Now, Nomad Scavengers and Nomad Conquerors have different themes from each other. Nomad Scavengers is very themed on just rotating around the map, scaling for late game, and not really having to fight other people. They also, in combat, focus very much on buffing up a few units with loot and being a very, I'm going to say, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring kind of style, where your heroes are your main hitters. Or for Chinese players, this would be like a Three Kingdoms style with Guan Yu, Liu Bei, and the third guy. So it's very much a style of combat of like, let's make our heroes very strong. Bit tedious to fight, but you know, so kind of unique if you want to look at it that way. Conquerors are very much focused on, you might not believe this, conquering. Very much on moving, running up to enemy cities, and slaughtering them. Now, then, what are the world map bonuses? It's a complicated culture, so we'll be here. What are the world map bonuses? Scavengers can eat wonders. When you scavenge a wonder, you get a buff into your city. Now, that buff will then buff that city based on how many other essences you have. So, for example, if you eat a wonder that produces knowledge, all your essences will now also produce knowledge. This does make Scavengers a decent chunk at scaling. Like, they're pretty decent at scaling, Problem, of course, is there comes a certain point where it doesn't really matter how much production you have, how much gold you have, how much mana you have, you're good to go. So if you don't find research wonders, you can find your scaling not really mattering the most. But it is the idea of kind of a late game scaling culture. And of course, the other problem is there is another late game scaling culture, the Architects, which scales better. So that's a bit of a problem. The combat bonus they get is looted power. Whenever a unit dies, not a combat summon, but a real unit dies, it drops loot. Loot can then be picked up for defense and a resistance, 20% more damage, and 20% more healing indefinitely. That stacks up to 5 times, up to 5 defense, 5 resistance, 100% damage, 100% more healing. Now, it does mean not healing received, healing to other people, okay? This is very strong if you stack it to 5 times, but these days takes a long bit of time to stack. Conquerors, on the other hand, if you pillage an opposing, why am I saying it's a weird day? If you pillage an opposing province and then eat that province into your city, you will get then draft, production, knowledge, and gold, and a lot of them too. Depending on how big the city is, it scales based on the population. Meaning that if you do eat a city that's like 5 pops, you won't get very much because it'll be 5, then 4, then 3. But if you eat a city that's 10 pops, you get a 10 pop boost, then a 9. And if you eat a city that's 15, you'll get a 15, then a 14. So the larger the city, the exponentially more resources you get from it. Eating very big cities is very good. You want to eat opposing cities, which means that while scavengers will generally pack up and run away, conquerors pack up and run at other people. Then they pillage their land and they eat it into their cities, and they get really, really powerful for doing that. Normally, though, due to the fact that nomads get -1 city, is that listed here? It's not listed here. Nomads get -1 city cap, and they get 50% more food required for cities. So if conquerors are not conquering, they end up very weak. If scavengers aren't scavenging, they end up very weak. But what conquerors do have in battle is the empowering momentum. It has been buffed a little bit, which was very nice. If you move at least 3 hexes, and you cannot move, then revert your movement and keep it. Don't worry, everybody's tried. If you move at least 3 spaces, then you get a defense, a resistance, 30% damage, and 30% more healing dealt. Now, this is obviously not the strongest bonus. It used to be crazy weak. It's still not the strongest, but you do get this right in the beginning of the game. It has no scaling or anything like that required, so you just right out the gate get momentum. It's a bit harder to use because the turn after your big turn, you lose that momentum and you have to gain it again, which can be difficult if you've ran up to enemies who now would get opportunity attacks against you for moving. But it is actually a weirdly good culture. It's supporting, well, support units. Units healing in the back will then be able to move 3 and heal. It doesn't have 3 AP abilities at all, though. The culture is very much based on movement. Nomads like to move, conquerors like to move. Shocking, the culture about moving likes to move a lot. Okay, so that's what they do uniquely. What are the spells and units of the culture? Now, let's go over the spells first. I've kind of swapped how I do it, but it might make more sense. Nomad Conquerors get as a spell Swift Strike Blessing. Not a very good spell, but it can be usable. Target friendly unit that has action points remaining and another friendly unit within 3 hexes gain momentum and fortune. So it's decent at helping 2 units get momentum. It would be much better if it was 5 mana. I mean, it uses your entire turn of casting, so 5 mana just to get your racial, or I should say cultural bonus back would, you know, I think that would be fair to me. The fortune is also not that great either. Overall, I don't think it's very good. Watchful Eye is a sustained world map spell. You get vision of an area and then 3 hexes around that area. Now, this can be used to kind of keep tabs on someone, but more importantly, it's generally used for its mark effect. Enemy units in this province suffer marked automatically, so they lose some evasion. You can hit them easier. There's no good tier 3 range units in the game. There's no good range units really at all in the game. If there was a tier 4 ranged unit and it had a 1 AP ability you can move and then use, this would be pretty good, but for now it's a bit hard. Right now, you use Watchful Eye and Well, really, I rarely see anyone even use it, to be honest. Chimes of Momentum just enchants other people with your culture. Now, their SPI is very strong for them. There's special bonus improvement that gives you 15 draft, and all enemy provinces, all adjacent provinces take -1 turn to pillage. This is quite useful for being able to set up next to a city, run onto their land, and start pillaging it. You'll generally want to pillage before you set up your city, but if you couldn't set that up, if you couldn't get a position where the provinces were pillaged before you set up your city, then you can set up the war camp, run up, and instantly start pillaging them. Then, it gives friendly units in this and adjacent provinces 15 hit point regeneration. I would like it if this was maybe this and like 2 adjacent provinces of range, not just the 1, but it is more world map healing, and you often do need world map healing playing Conquerors, because the playstyle is just go, 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 go. You cannot stop. You must keep conquering. You cannot ever stop conquering, ever. Because you have -1 city, and you overexhaust your land. It's a rough playstyle, right? But it is a very fun playstyle, I should say. Scavengers get a slightly different setup here. They get empowering trophies, which allows you for 10 mana to give a friendly unit but you just give a friendly unit +1 loot. It's really good and can be spammed to just buff up your heroes. Takes an entire turn of casting though, so as time goes on it might be worse, but it might be worth it because of the second spell here, Improvised Remedy. All friendly units with looted power have a full purge on them and heal for 10. So that's a pretty strong spell. Very strong. This just gives all non-culture units Scavenger. Scavenging Camp gives you 10 gold and then 10 gold for each adjacent province containing a resource node. The idea here is you put down Scavenging Camp next to 2 or even 3 provinces, and you can get like 30, 40 gold from that pretty easy. The gold mine already being 5 gold, so that's like a good 25 to 35 more gold. It's definitely a pretty good SPI. I think it's a bit undervalued, but it is actually, in my opinion, a pretty good one. The Nomad units are pretty unique in how they play, in that they're all about mobility. The Wind Warrior is probably their overall worst unit, but not terrible, just overall their worst. It is a tier 1 shield unit. We just have the generic tier 1 shield unit stats. I've probably mentioned them a lot in this video. 10 damage, no effect on it there. Their special ability is Windborne Rescue. Swap places with a target friendly unit and heal target and the caster for 10. So it's a decent heal, it's a decent way to get people out of zone of control, or it's a decent way to move a unit 1 tile closer to where they need to be, which often is the only tile you needed to get where you needed to be. So it's a versatile ability. You can use it in different situations. Of course, it leaves 1 AP, so you can end in defense mode as well. So it is a decent way to get a shield unit exactly where they need to be, or to get another unit where they need to be and leave where they are with a shield unit. It's versatile. The unit's not that great, but having 1 is not a bad idea. Dune Rider is a unique scout unit, and I do say unique on this one. It gets 12 damage with its shoot bow, and the first attack in a turn deals 50% more damage. Warfare training, meaning this counts as both a ranged unit and a scout for enchantments. This means that if you want to spam ranged units, you can start immediately with a Dune Rider. Then the Dune Rider will be a high mobility unit. A bit squishy, yes, but for a ranged unit, a pretty decent one, funny enough. The Looter is for the Scavengers. The Scavengers get this unit, the Conquerors do not. It is a generic tier 1 skirmisher, 55-20 stats. It can be a cavalry, melee strike with no special bonuses, and then shoot crossbow. Now, while on its face value, the shoot crossbow looks pretty generic, it is 22 damage on a tier 1 unit, which is a very high amount of damage. I would say this puts this unit at least on par, probably, with the... which is that unit? The Barbarian... what's it called? Sunderer. It's probably at least about on par with the Barbarian Sunderer. Now, Sunderers scale their damage a bit better throughout the game, and Looters have the problem where they do have no cultural bonus until an enemy dies, or an ally dies. And that's the worst time. You don't want to wait until people are dying to get a cultural bonus. They definitely have a bonus that's a bit hard to balance, I would say. The Raider is the unique unit for the Conquerors. which is not really that unique compared to most of the other Nomad units. It's got a generic charge strike, 75-30 stats. That one extra defense is basically the majority of its bonus. If not for that, it has fiery momentum. While this unit has momentum, it gains Demolisher and Burning. As of right now, the Demolisher is bugged. I'm hoping that gets fixed. But it would then, if it was fixed, it would give the Nomads a way to break city walls early in the game so that they could take out walled cities much easier. Which is, ironically, kind of a problem for them right now. And really, just applying one stack of Burning when you have momentum and having one defense, 5 HP, it's okay. I would say it's firmly an okay unit. I don't hate having them, but it's not the best tier 1 unit. It's like in the upper mid tiers, let's say. The Dust Weaver is definitely a good support unit. Now, there is Dust Weaver for Scavengers and for Conquerors. I'll talk about the differences in a second. It is just a generically statted up unit here. It does get a 90% chance to blind or a 90% chance to burn. The 90% chance to blind might be a little bit better, I would say, maybe, but you never know. They get different abilities here. The Scavenger unit gets Distributing Wind. Remove the target loot marker and grant a friendly unit within 4 hexes looted power and 15 hit points. This is a great way to get loot out from under enemies, and at 0 actions, it's just a free use ability every other turn. If an enemy is standing on loot to try to deny it from you, you just go nope. Or if you killed an enemy too far away, you can bring it into allies. Or if you just don't want to move someone onto the loot because that would use too much movement, then you could use Distributing Wind. Unfortunately, Distributing Wind is not applied to other support units once you culturally enchant them. I wish that it was, but we'll have to see. Conquerors get Weave Momentum. Target friendly unit that has action points remaining gets momentum. That's it. So this can give allies momentum. This can give allies loot. Again, I wish it was like High, where they gave other support units of their culture this bonus, so that the culture had a bit more versatility. Having to use a tier 2 unit to continue to scale is a bit awkward, but not the end of the world because the Recovering Wind Pull ability is pretty good. Target friendly unit heals your 20 hit points, loses all negative status effects, and then teleports to an adjacent space. Really good. Recovering Wind Pull, really good. A full cleanse and heal and teleport all on one ability. Champion Recovering Wind Pull gives it a 10 extra healing and -1 cooldown. This means that Champion Dust Weavers are a nuisance and are quite frustrating for enemies to deal with. The Strider is our other tier 2 unit, being actually a regular range unit at this point, though it is an optional cavalry. We get Shoot Bow with the opening shot. First attack in a turn deals 50% more damage, and then their special ability is Wind Stride. They can teleport 3 spaces for free and then gain fortune. It's a ranged unit who typically suck. I still don't think much of it, but of all range units that suck, this one sucks some of the least, but still a little bit. The tier 3 units for each culture are wildly different. The Collector is a tier 3 polearm unit, and this is, you might not believe it, it's for the Scavengers. Scavengers get the Collector, who is a tier 3 polearm unit, 100 HP, 4-2, generic stat line right there, nothing to talk about. Its melee strike is just a regular melee strike, but it does get this special ability, Plow Through. Melee, single shot, and movement, not base. Really wish it was base. Wish the developers would remember to make all these special abilities base. So Plow Through just knocks an enemy back. I would say this is generally useful for when an enemy is standing on loot that you want, or if an enemy is standing next to somebody you don't want them to be standing next to. Their other special ability is Dig Up. You can destroy a corpse and gain a stack of looted power. Now, this is pretty good because this is an extra source of loot generation. Oh, I did forget, the looter has a catch ability. He can throw a stack of loot that he has onto an ally, which is fairly useful to just, toss it onto your heroes in the early game. The Collector is a pretty good unit. It does have the unfortunate downside of only being tier 3, meaning for a unit that can generate lots of loot and tank a lot, it does eventually stop scaling. If Dig Up was available on Pyre Templars, it would be overpowered, but I wish tier 3 cultural units scaled a bit better. Maybe if there was a special enchantment or something you could do to buff them. A lot of these cultural units are very needed for a culture to prosper, and then, once you get in the late game, collectors suffer a lot because there's just not enough units that you can kill. There's not enough loot you can make. But collectors are pretty decent, and they can still destroy the corpse of a combat summon. Even if you can't get regular loot from it, you can get loot from the corpse of a combat summon, so they can get a decent chunk of loot, and they can just be kind of a nuisance, let's say. The champion is even more of a nuisance. Now, his stat line is 110, 5, 1, so he has 10 more HP, 1 more defense to make up for -1 resistance. So he's a tanky dude. He does only have that 4 combat speed, which is really, really, really tough to deal with. But with 10 extra HP, it does kind of try to compensate. What also tries to compensate is the fact that he is a terror, a menace, a champion, if you will. Storm Strike is an ability, automatically has 2 chances to, or no, sorry, it's not 2, 1 chance at 90% chance to apply 2 Sundered. This isn't like the Architect unit, it's 1 chance at 90%. I wish they would make this 2 chances at 90% for 1 each, instead of 2 on a 90% chance. But whatever. What also makes the Storm Strike so good is Storm Stance. After charging an enemy, you then get Storm Stance, giving you 1 defense and 1 resistance. You lose it when this unit enters Wind Stance, but if you use momentum and charge an enemy, you will get 1 defense, 1 resistance, and then another 1 defense, 1 resistance, because you'll have momentum and Storm Stance at the same time. That put this unit baseline all the way up to 7 defense on charge. A menace. And with the ability to sunder defenses, a menace. And then remember, Storm Strike will proc on any retaliation attack, on any opportunity attack, so it is pretty easy these days to remove retaliation attacks, but not removing these guys' retaliations is particularly devastating, I would say. Very unique for a charge unit is he has a triple attack. Now, due to the fact that he does have momentum, this means this will be a triple attack that doesn't have any buffs on it, which is kind of bad, but, you know, for a charge unit to have a triple attack at all is still pretty good, right? Wind Strike. You triple attack an enemy and knock them back at the end of your turn. You then get Wind Stance. Now, Wind Stance will make you lose Storm Stance, unfortunately. But once you do get Wind Stance, you will have Slippery and Swift. So you'll knock an enemy back, and then even if they walk up to you, they'll only be able to attack twice because they will use 1 movement. And then you can use Slippery and Swift to run away again. Reasonably, most people just spam Storm Strike, as you can imagine, and don't try to do the Wind Strike Storm Strike combo. But there definitely are situations where if you're enchanted a lot and an enemy like really needs to be triple hit, you can use Wind Strike. It's not a bad ability. If you can't really move around, then you can just use it. But a lot of people just like spamming Storm Strike because, oh my god, that tankiness and that damage. The War Stance's effect is whenever you swap one stance to another, you automatically get building momentum, which gives you automatically Empower. So it's not really as strong as you'd hope, maybe. But, I mean, you basically just spam Storm Strike. The unit itself is very good. It's just this War Stance's effect is just not very good. Does this culture have any major differences in power depending on the map? Yes. Conquerors excels on smaller maps and does very poorly on large maps. Scavengers does well on large maps, but not very well on very large maps. That's because they scale into the mid-game, the late mid-game, but they obviously are not that great at scaling due to how looted power works. They're a very safe culture and they can run around, but they do need space on the map to move around, which does get us into the tiering, which is to say that scavengers aren't very good. They're playable, but again, what I mentioned, like they need a very specific situation where they can run away from people while eating essences, while scaling, but not against people who can just sit there and outscale them like architects. And because they don't impact mythics as much as many other cultures due to loot, again, this means that their late game, their hyper late game is just not as good. Conquerors are definitely playable. I'd put them at B tier. They're not as good as some of these other hyper rush, just giga destroy cultures. Ash Sabertooth, Strife, they just outperform them at that role. Glacial Mammoth, Dune Serpent. But Conquerors, I would say, is firmly good. I would like it if momentum scaled a little bit better, but I'm not really sure how they would do that without making it even stronger in the early game. They could try to do a few things, but overall, that's about where I would put scavengers, and that's about where I would put conquerors. Barbarians are one of the cultures that was in the game at launch. Because of that, they are not a very complicated culture. They have only received one minor update since then. The theme of the culture is they really like to do criticals, and they really like to run around the map and power level their heroes. The world map bonuses are that they get Ritual of Alacrity, and they get bonus damage on crits, which is also the unique aspects of the culture. I would mention both of these at the same time because everything they do is kind of unique. Just they do a few things and they do it very well. Whenever they crit, they get Savage Strike. Savage Strike is 4 blight damage, 8 blight damage on a single shot. So the more they crit, the more damage they deal. Their cities and outposts get Ritual of Alacrity, which when activated, friendly units on the center of the outpost or city restore 50% hit points, 100% move points, and remove exhausted from Force March. This enables you to run around the map very easily and power level your heroes. On bigger maps, this allows you to move a lot and super power level your heroes and your lord. Also, and I'm going to mention this as the world map bonus and the unique aspect of the culture. I normally leave their buildings to a little bit later, but this one's pretty important, is the Shrine of the War God. Any barbarian city that's reached tier 3 can build this building, and then units built in the city gain +2 physical damage on non-magic attacks. This effect is increased for single shot attacks. This is obviously pretty good, and then when a barbarian unit built in a city with the Shrine of the War God that crits, whatever I just said, if you crit and have Shrine of the War God on you, you get 6 damage instead of 5. 5 would otherwise be the highest damage in the game, but the barbarians can technically surpass that if they do have 100% crit. So that's unique about them, and that's generally what they do. There's not much else to be mentioned here. Ritual of Alacrity will allow you to remove the exhaust from Force March, allowing you to sprint around the map at full speed and still take battle after battle after battle. So that is obviously really good. Not much more to say. What are the spells and units of the culture? Barbarians do not, from what I remember, get a particularly good spell line. Yes, Song of the Reckless. For 3 turns, target friendly unit gets Berserk and 3 strengthened, but does not affect units with control-less immunity. For 15 mana, this is not very good. Nothing more to say, it's just not very good. Visions of Victory. Friendly units at a 1 hex radius get 3 fortune. At 30 mana, 25 combat casting, this is a pretty expensive spell for some reason. Both their spells seem to be overcost. I'm going to assume that's because Barbarian is part chaos, and like old chaos spells, it costs a little bit too much. I don't really have much to say about this. It's neither of these are really that good. Visions of Victory can be okay if you maybe have the Chaos Amplifier Tome and you give it 3 strengthen, 3 fortune, and an AoE. Even then it's 30 mana, 25 combat casting. The unique special bonus improvement is the Force of Snakes, 7 food, 7 production, and 7 drafts per adjacent forester. Not really that good either. Worth building just to get some extra draft in a pinch. You do eventually reach points where you have nothing left to do, but you really need more draft. In that situation, it can kind of be helpful. Then Brutal Mark just gives Savage Strike to every single unit. The Barbarian units themselves are not particularly great, but they do have 2 standouts, really. Well, 3 actually. Their Pathfinder is the very unique scout who can build outposts, which is really, really, really strong. That combined with Ritual of Alacrity pretty much makes up 90% of the strength behind Barbarians alone. Their Sunderer is a skirmisher unit with 60 HP instead of 55, a little bit of a boost there. Their Melee Strike has no special effect, and then their Javelin inflicts automatic Sunder defense. It does 6 less damage than the Looter from the Scavenger culture, but it does get the Barbarian Savage Strike, which is a bit better, I would say, than Looting. It really depends on the map, depends on a lot, right? But Javelin does inflict automatic Sunder defense, which means everyone else will get a bit of a damage boost. Multiple Sunderers hitting a target can kill it pretty easily. Overall, not a bad unit, certainly worth building. The Warrior over time, I would say, has gotten worse, not because himself, not because he's been nerfed, but rather because every other shield unit continues to get buffed. The warrior at launch was one of the premier shield units, just doing very, very good, and since then just keeps doing worse. He does have optional cavalry, which is not very unique anymore. He does have shield bash, base 90% chance of stunning an enemy, and then you enter defense mode. Obviously the issue with the issue with shield bash is it does proc a retaliation attack, which means if you fail that stun, you will then get retaliated. If you succeed the stun, you won't get retaliated. At only a 90% chance, this does mean that you have a 10% chance to fail and get retaliated against. You will be in defense mode, but you will eat a retaliation attack, then be triple attacked, and it's just overall not the greatest position to find yourself in for the warrior. That's all he does. Other than that, so you can see why he might have been power creeped a little bit. The War Shaman is a tier 2 support unit that has been buffed recently and is a little bit better. He has a 90% chance to poison, poison being probably the best dot because it counters regeneration. So it does do 2 less damage, it does apply poison. Overall, it's worth using, but it's not the best basic attack, but it is one of the better ones to use maybe. They did get this new Kindle Resolve ability added. On a 2-turn cooldown, so once every 3 turns, target friendly unit gets cleansed of 2 effects and gains 10 morale. Pretty good for free, and it is a support ability, so it would scale in things that buff support abilities. Invigorate is cooldown 3, so a long cooldown, not cooldown 2 like the Vowkeeper, cooldown 3. Grants friendly units in a 1 hex radius, 10 healing, 1 strengthened, 1 regeneration. Overall, it's worth using, but it does really suffer being on cooldown 3. I can imagine the developers are in a bit of a bind. If they make it cooldown 2, you could sit in the corner spamming on your units, which would be a bit much. But on cooldown 3, you get to use it once per battle, and then you have to run up and use Blight Blast. Overall, they're an okay support, but they're no Bannerman, they're no Vowkeeper. The Fury is actually what I would say is not a bad range unit. I would say they're one of the better ones, even though on their face level they don't really look too remarkable. They are optional cavalry, and the reason they do sort of okay is their -2 damage penalty got removed, so now they just have Frenzy for free, which is fair because I mean every unit gets a special effect, right? Frenzy means every time they attack they get a stack of Strengthened, so if a Fury gets to sit in the back and attack a lot, they get to build up a lot of Strengthened. Well, early in the game, where tier 2 units might shine, there's not many sources of Strengthened. So getting to 5 Strengthened just means that the Fury will do a lot of damage compared to other range units, so long as it's not eliminated early in the battle. The Berserker is, I think, the premier shock unit to show how bad shock units are. It is the general stat line for a tier 3 shock unit, but only has 4 combat speed. It's really rough. To compensate for that, they do get Frenzy and Berserker's Rage, but both these things are not really that diabolical. Frenzy gives him 2 stacks of Strengthened after he attacks, due to Charge Strike being a single shot, but getting damage after you attack on a charge unit is generally not where you want to be getting your damage. Its special passive here is Berserker's Rage. When its hit points reach 33% or lower, it gets Berserk and Steadfast. Berserk means that it ignores the penalty of casualties, and it just automatically attacks the closest unit. Steadfast means that it can't die. The general idea then is once a Berserker gets put to low HP, they get Steadfast for 1 turn, but you can't choose who they attack. The downside here is pretty obvious. If you never let them reach 33% or lower, then they don't get this. Meaning if you just bring them from half to dead, or from even 34% to dead, then they never get Berserker Rage, which is actually surprisingly not too difficult to play around. And due to their low range, and due to the fact they have no other special effects, no special abilities, nothing, they are one of the easiest units to actually end up playing around. There is one build, the double Steadfast one with the Tome of Sanctuary, where they do see some use, but overall, I would say this entire roster is not the greatest. Really, the only big standouts are Fury, Pathfinder, and Sunderer can do okay.
What is that?
So, are there any major differences in power depending on the map? Yes. If Barbarians are on a very small map or a large map, they tend to excel. But on very large and above maps, if you have mods or anything like that, they do not, in my opinion, tend to do well. And that is because They will get outscaled by some things, but they do scale decently. It's really hard to tell. Really, the big thing is that all mythics being able to be enchanted with cultural enchantments isn't the biggest deal for barbarians, because it's really hard for them to get mythics up to that 100% crit chance. Whereas for racial units, they can get them to 100% crit chance. So it's a bit awkward. It's a bit awkward for barbarians. If you go Force of Nature, or maybe you have Infernal Might Demons, in that situation you can do it, but it's... ugh. Infernal Might Tier 5 Chaos is a bit rough to use for barbarians because they, as a culture, have no defense and they're really focused on doing damage. The best time to do damage is before you kill enemies, not after. Okay. What is the overall rating of the culture? I'm going to put barbarians over here in C tier. Now, there is one addendum to this. I think if you play at an optimal map size barbarians and you know the tempo and you know to use a high level super powerful lord, you can end up eliminating people quite easily. Other AI, other players in multiplayer, it's very easy to power level your lord using the Ritual of Alacrity, and a high level lord, especially on some of these special lords like vampires, eldritch, dragons, giant kings. Once you get a lot of points into these fellas, they can do a lot. I mean, it's not even that they can do a lot of damage. I mean, they could also debuff a lot, or they could just heal a lot, or they could buff a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can make your lords do, right? And if you can get many levels advantage, it can just win you the game by themselves. But normally, I would say that they just massively underperform due to their weak economy, due to Ritual of Alacrity being their only big selling point, and due to the fact that their cultural units are pretty weak overall, which means that until you get to tier 4 and tier 5 units from tomes, they don't have many good options. The Barbarian Berserker, especially being weak, does not help them. Primal is a culture that has been buffed most since I did a last culture video, and it is probably the biggest zero to hero. It is definitely one to pay attention to. I can describe the theme of the culture, the world map bonuses of the culture, and what they do uniquely all at the same time. Primal really loves to terraform land. They really like to take terrain and turn it into their favored terrain. Each Primal has one type of favored terrain, for example, swamp for Mire Crocodile, and if their cities, their provinces are on that favored terrain, they will then get a buff. For example, Mire Crocodile gets 3 food, Tunneling Spider gets 2 knowledge, Sylvan Wolf gets 3 draft. You can combo these with tomes that also buff that terrain. For example, Tome of the Cold Dark with Glacial Mammoth, or Dune Serpent goes along with Tome of Sandstalkers, Sylvan Wolf, which is order and not nature, even though the nature tome is Tome of Paradise. Their other world map bonuses are, as I did mention, they do like to terraform, and the way they terraform is with their temples. There are trees around the map that you have to go find, and when you settle a city next to a tree and you take it into your city, you can then build these temples. Once you have these temples in your city, you'll get 5 mana, but more importantly, once per turn, it will terraform one province around your city into your favorite terrain. So throughout the course of a game, your cities will slowly terraform everything into your favorite terrain, meaning that Glacial Mammoth will turn everything to snow, Dune Serpent will turn everything into dunes, technically desert, but I'm called dunes, Mire Crocodile will turn everything into swamp. In addition to that, another world map bonus they have is their cultural bonus, which you can then enchant onto other units that you use with their typical cultural enchant, right? They get a walk of whatever type they're on. So for example, Sylvan Wolf gets Forest Lock, Ash Sabertooth gets Desolate Walk, Stormcrow gets Grasslands Walk, and then they get a boon. The boon is what they use in combat. Now, I do believe, yes, Mire Crocodile also gets status effect immunity diseased. That's because of their boon. Some boons are just pure damage, and some boons have wacky effects. The wacky effects are generally stronger. So once you attack an enemy, you will get 1 stack of Rising Fury. At 3 stacks of Rising Fury, you will then get the boon. Now, single shot attacks will give you 2 stacks of Rising Fury, but will only use 1 boon. They won't deal double damage. Now that's because, again, some of these effects do have unique effects, and using 2 of your boons, your Furies, would not be considered a very good thing, right? It's a bit annoying when you're trying to single shot on the ones that just do pure damage, like Stormcrow just does pure damage, so not having it double proc on single shot's a bit annoying, but it's a consistent thing, right? Now, the unique effects can be, for example, Mire Crocodile will deal 3 blight damage and automatically disease enemies. Glacial Mammoth will deal 4 frost damage and have a 30% chance of inflicting frozen. Failing the frozen, it will give status vulnerability. Dune Serpent will give enemies 4 physical damage and blind. Well, you deal 4 physical, you're not giving them the blind to be. And then Tunneling Spider will deal 3 blight damage and give you lifesteal on those attacks. There's also some unique effects for the damage dealers, like Sylvan Wolf will do 3 damage, then an additional 2 damage per friendly unit adjacent to the target. So, you know, you got lots of different ways to use your boons. It's important for some of them, like Mire Crocodile being able to disease everyone is pretty good. Glacial Mammoth being able to stack status vulnerability or freeze people is pretty good. Dune Serpent being able to blind people, as you might imagine, is pretty good. So the culture is one of their better made cultures, probably my most favorite culture to play, that is just very, very strong. It only gets stronger from here right now, because when we start talking about the spells and units of the culture, you might think, okay, well, they've got a great world map economy, how about their units? Let's see the undercarriage, what's going on in there. In the past, Primal did not have very good, well, at this point, this is when you would start saying, oh, now they're falling off, ooh, they're not doing very good. But now this is where they only get better. Ancestral Harmony is a spell that every single Primal gets, 5 mana to heal 15, and then if Fury is active, they heal 30. Now, remember, you used to need 5 stacks of Fury to proc Boon for 5 attacks, now you need 3 stacks to proc it for 3 attacks. Significantly better, because it would often be that the battle could end before you would get your Fury up. Now, well, you can get that Fury up very quickly. In addition to that, it used to be that when you completed the quest, there is a cultural quest, and you do need to complete it, but once you do complete it, any unit that enters the battle with your Lord will start with their Fury already active, which is pretty good. So, Ancestral Harmony, pretty strong healing spell. At worst, it's 5 mana to heal 15 early game. Their Conjure is also a pretty good thing, although it does cost a lot, and the different primals will have varying levels of strength on them. For example, Primal Crow will be able to sunder enemies' resistances. It does cost a lot, but you know, you can use it to summon behind enemies, sunder their resistances for maybe other spells. Primal Wolf will then get the Fury of the Sylvan Wolf. If you put him next to a unit that already has a bunch of allies adjacent to him, you'll be able to deal a lot of damage. They do cost 45 mana, 30 combat casting, but overall they can be quite powerful, and some of them, for example Glacial Mammoth, can be summoned behind enemies and then charge them from the back, knocking them further into your line. Displacements are very powerful in turn-based games. Enemies being where they don't want to be can give you a lot of strength. So their first combat spell is good, their second combat spell is good. Now their Communion, this just gives the boon and then the walk effect to whichever they have here. Now this does also apply now to mythic units, which is much better than it was in the past. In the past you couldn't apply it to mythic units, which meant, for example, if I was playing Primal Mammoth, all my mythic units would be permanently slowed on snow, whereas the rest of my army would be moving super quick. I mean, roads would mitigate that problem obviously, but it was a bit annoying. And being able to get the boon onto mythics, well, the boon is not the best effect in the game. It doesn't scale, but it starts pretty decent and then stays decent, I would say, throughout the game. The SPI that the different primals have is different, but has the same idea. So, for example, Ash Sabertooth gives gold per Ashland province baseline, and then the Ash Megalith gives you 6 gold per adjacent Ashland province as well. So these SPIs can end up producing a lot of gold, of production, of mana. Now some SPIs are a little bit weaker. For example, Dune Serpent only gives 4 instead of 6, don't know why. Stormcrow only gives 4 instead of 6, once again, don't know why. I think the other ones are about right. Tunneling Megalith is probably a bit overtuned right now. The unique building for their cities is the Shrine to the Spirits. For every farm you have in the city, you get 10 more food. If you're doing certain food-based builds, this can be useful. A lot of people don't build this, but again, it can be useful in certain food-based builds. For example, if you have the Mark of Nature, you can use this to just generate a lot of food, which then generates a lot of mana. It really depends on what you're doing. Overall, I do build it most of the time, but sometimes I don't. If you have 2 farms, it's not doing anything. If you have 3, it's still not doing anything. But if you have 4, 5, 6, it'll start probably doing enough. Now, the cultural units for Primal are why they do so well, but not because of all of them, because of 3 of them. Fortunately, 3 of them they get really early in the game, and then the rest of them suck. Primal Protector is a generically statted shield unit with an optional mount. On face level, he's not really that amazing. What does make him amazing is the rework to Primal Renewal. This ability heals 30 temporary hit points and enters defense mode on cooldown 1. There's no catch here. It does exactly what it says. Yes, that is exactly as good as you think it is. This unit on the first turn of combat can instantly heal 30. This means you can take lots of combats with the Primal Protector, and the first bit of damage he hits will actually just be temporary hit points, not even permanent hit points. The Primal Protector is probably the best unit in the game right now for clearing the map, for taking early fights, and has become a general nuisance to the game's balance. Note to the developer, maybe make it like starting cooldown 2 or something like that. Like you maybe can't use it for the first 2 turns of combat, or maybe the first turn of combat at the very least. The Spirit Tracker is a scout that is the best at scouting. As you can imagine, a scout that is the best at scouting tends to be a pretty good scout. Unlike the High Scout, who has +1 vision range, this one has a +6 sensing range. While you won't see what's in the Fog of War, you can see their presence. Seeing their presence will generally be pretty useful for alerting you for potential areas for cities. If you see 3 stacks on top of each other, you can generally infer that that's 3 armies coming at you. You don't need to directly see things for sensing range to be pretty good. So Primal has a scout that is the best scout. The Primal Darter continues to be disappointing no matter how many times they buff it. It is a 3 ranged unit that now has more HP, more defense, and more resistance than other ranged units. Despite that, it underperforms because, again, it's 3 range. In addition to that, it has a special ability, Disengaging Shot. For 1 AP, you deal damage to target unit and jump back 3 hexes. Although it doesn't list it, this will put it out of range of their retaliation, unless they have first strike, which means you won't be retaliated against. Good for getting out of melee range, or in a pinch, good for a sudden burst of damage that you're trying to deal to people. It is a missile-based single shot, so it can be pretty good for dealing damage to people. Overall, I just don't like the unit at all. Primal Charger is a disappointment to God. This unit is stat like a pretty generic tier 2 shock unit, which is to say, disappointing. The Charge Strike is just a regular Charge Strike, and it has no passive abilities whatsoever. What it does get is Cleaving Charge. Cleaving Charge doesn't actually cleave. Well, no, it does cleave, it doesn't charge. I said that backwards. This should just be Cleaving Strike, not Cleaving Charge. That's because it doesn't do anything that a charge does. Cleaving Charge is Cleaving Strike because it does not remove their retaliation and does not remove their defense mode. In addition, at a mere 17 damage and not being single shot, it really doesn't deal that much damage that you would hope for either. And it will proc every retaliation attack and just get it mollywopped in return for trying to AoE a bunch of enemies. Overall, Cleaving Charge is rarely ever worth using, and you would just want to go Charge Strike, and you'll probably deal more damage to 1 target with Charge Strike than you would deal to 2 with Cleaving Charge, in addition to the fact that Charge Strike removes their defense mode and retaliation, which is just generally more useful. This does mean that the best use of Primal Charger is to just use it as a generic tier 2 charge unit, which again is to say it's just not very good at all. It's one of the worst charge units in the entire game. Its only real saving aspect is 5 movement speed, but any charge unit below 6 movement speed needs a really good reason for that. The Primal Animist is the last really powerful primal cultural unit. It is a support unit that on its surface doesn't really do anything remarkable. It is 60 HP, 1 defense, 3 resistance, 16 damage on hit with no special effect that many supports have. A totally average unit. What does make this unit so powerful though is its summon ability. This did get reworked during the Primal rework, and it used to require you to build up stacks of Fury in order to summon it. With 5 stacks of Fury, this took forever and would rarely, if ever, get used. This meant that the Animist was one of, if not the worst support unit in the game. It does still have a heal, and its heal is not really that great, but its summon is really, really, really good. It will summon whatever animal you went with for your Primal. Primal Mammoth, Primal Wolf, Primal Spider. And when you do summon the animal, it will get Frenzy if the battle is taking place within your favorite terrain. The animal's strength depends on which primal type you went with, but generally they will go from strong to very, very strong. They have no actual weak summons. All these animals are, well, animals, so they do get combat trained, which they really shouldn't, giving them 10 more HP, 1 more defense, and 1 more resistance than they would have otherwise, which again makes them very tanky and hard to remove for a unit that a tier 2 unit can summon. They are mythics, so they don't scale on enchantments, but they do scale on being mythics, which just makes them really strong out of the box. As you can imagine, a summon that's very strong out of the box is probably the best thing you can do for a tier 2 unit. It does have a heal, and the heal is on cooldown 1, but it heals for a mere 20. If you have stacks of Primal Fury available, it will spend them all to heal 10 hit points, which can be decent. If you do get this unit to champion rank, it will heal an additional 10, and its Primal Fury spending will remove a negative status effect for each amount spent. If your champion, your lord, has completed his quest and it starts with Fury, this then means that they can enter the battle and at champion rank heal for 60 and remove 3 negative effects. Which, if you spend your first turn walking up, your second turn summoning, and your third turn healing people, is a pretty good use of your time. It's not the best support at that stage in the game, into late game, but this summon does just make it outrageously good in the early to mid game. It is quite difficult to deal with multiple animists on the opposing side in the early game. The Ancestral Warden is a polearm unit that I would say was originally quite strong when it released, but due to lots of power creep and due to not keeping up with that power creep, it has ended up weaker and weaker and weaker as time goes on. The unit itself is just a generic polearm unit stat-wise. Nothing remarkable here, no special effect on its attack, and actually no passive ability whatsoever. Its only unique effect is the Primal Lunge, which allows it to jump forward and deal AoE damage to a bunch of enemies. This ability will only give you 1 stack of Rising Fury, which isn't very good. You will enter defense mode after using it, but being a melee ability that is not even base, Primal Lunge will end up not hitting very hard as the game goes on, and it will end up not really mattering that you can jump into your enemies. If you do rush into Ancestral Wardens, getting a tier 3 unit into their backline can be good, but against pretty much any other tier 3 unit, as of now, this is just being left in the dust. When old tier 3 units are getting stronger and stronger to actually make them worth using, this one has not gotten any stronger. So, does Primal have any major differences in power depending on the map? Well, no, not really. They mostly do find late game. I would say they might fall off a little bit into the hyper late game against things like Architects or Barbarians, but reasonably I would say Primal is like really, really good early game, and then they kind of fall off to just being regular strength. They're not particularly weak though. What is the overall rating of the culture? Well, that is best said individually for each different Primal. Primal Mammoth, I would say, is S tier due to the synergy they have with all the different cold tomes. Due to these cold tomes leading into some of the best builds in the game, Fallen Angels, and due to Primal now also again having that very powerful early game. A very powerful early game, having access to liquids. I should mention that each Primal will put you where that element is. So for example, Glacial Mammoth will always put you in the snow. Snow will always spawn liquids, the magic material. Liquids are blatantly overpowered and the best magic material. With that in mind, Glacial Mammoth is just way strong. If they did nerf liquids, or at the very least if they buffed up plants, Glacial Mammoth would go down a little bit in power. But I would say as of right now, it is really, really, really strong. Dune Serpent, likewise, is very strong right now because of their synergy with Tome of the Sandstalkers. Now, Dune Serpent's boon automatically blinds enemies. when you go Tome of the Sandstalkers on the sand terrain, you can use the insane benefits of Tome of the Sandstalkers economy with Dune Serpent automatically blinding people, combo that with the Tome of Shades, get piercing against all enemies that are blinded, and you can kind of see where this is all going, right? The summon that you can get from the Animists is also just as devastating as it always was, so you have a build that will be able to do very well early game with Animists and Protectors, scaling mid-game and late game into units that will blind enemies automatically and get tons of piercing. You won't be able to be retaliated against, and you will do a lot of damage. Okay, the next one is Ash Sabertooth, and although there is no synergy for Ashlands right now, I would say Ash Sabertooth, just through generating 3 gold, does very, very, very well. If there was some synergy for generating, if there was some synergy for generating Ashland, I would say they would do better. As for now, there's not. Now, Ash Sabertooth does spawn in Desolate. Desolate gives you metals. Metals are better than plants. That does give them a bit of an advantage over the other cultures. And Dune Serpent generates a mere 2 gold for some reason, but Ash Sabertooth generates 3 gold, so they give a bit of an economical advantage. Also, their Special Province Improvement gives them 6 gold per tile, while Dune Serpents gives them 4. Once again, for some reason. I don't really know. Then there is Primal. If not otherwise mentioned, I would also just put in A tier. I would say Ash Sabertooth is better than the other ones, but Primal, if not otherwise mentioned, is here. Now, last up, I'm going to put Stormcrow all the way down here in B tier. I would say it's actually worse than the regular Primals. Now, why is that? That's because Stormcrow has the unfortunate placement. I did mention that every Primal would be put in their element. Unfortunately for Stormcrow, Grasslands is the dead center of the map. Being put in the dead center of the map is not good. That is a debuff that makes you weaker. Additionally, Grasslands Walk, which used to compensate for that, made you move 4 movement speed through Grasslands, giving you hyper movement. That's been nerfed to 5. They did buff up Stormcrow's boon a little bit, but the 4 lightning damage to adjacent enemy units is resisted. It gets reduced by resistance. I don't know why I tried to say the same thing twice, which means that it will often end up only dealing 2 damage due to rounding, and that's just not very good. If it gets rounded all the way to 1 damage, well, yeah. So there's no debuff here. There's no scaling here. It only gives 2 mana, 4 mana per adjacent, so it doesn't even generate unlimited mana. You can't ignore mana buildings, even if you go Stormcrow. It's just very weak, in my opinion. Reavers is not a very strong culture. Despite that, they continue to be extremely, extremely popular. What is the theme of Reavers? Guns, war, conquest, expansion. A very popular theme. People really like guns and cannons. That continues to resonate with a lot of people, and they continue to play it despite how weak the culture is, just because they like it so much. What then are the world map bonuses of the culture? Their 2 main bonuses, I would say, are the Total War and the War Spoils. Total War is no longer unique to them. Nomad Conquerors have also gotten it, although they did deserve it, and I think it's fair that they got it, but that does mean it's no longer unique to Reavers. The second mechanic is War Spoils. Whenever they kill units belonging to empires, dwellings, or free cities, they get War Spoils. They can then spend these War Spoils in order to intimidate free cities, increasing their allegiance with you, extort to force other empires to trade you resources, declare supremacy, which eliminates the relations penalty of grievances and also makes people like you a bit more, which, okay. And then you can extort War Spoils for resources, other favors, or use it to recruit units who were subdued by their support unit. I'll get into that later. This is to say, it's not very strong. It seems at the surface level that this could be strong, and I'm sure when they added it into the game, it seemed like it was going to be strong, but it just didn't really end up being that strong, frankly. The Total War mechanic is nice, but none of this really makes up for -1 Whispering Stone. Having your capital instantly go to negative stability once you hit 5 population is not very good. In fact, most people would consider that quite bad. People often put their starting Whispering Stone into their capital so that they don't need to immediately sprint to Tavern, and instead they're free to build a bunch of buildings first. Reavers can't do that, and they don't really get anything to compensate for that one. That about mentions the entire world map bonus of the culture. What do they do uniquely? They can spend their war spoils in order to get cannons, but the cannon unit is only tier 3 and really not that good anymore anyway. None of their other effects are really that good. I don't really know what to say about this one. So what are the spells and units of the culture? Don't worry, it only gets downhill from here. Reavers get some unique spells that are... I call them unique in the same way I might call myself special. Their first spell is Suppressing Barrage. In a 1 hex radius, units suffer 10 physical damage and have a very low 30% chance of being immobilized. It is not very consistent and still does cost a decent chunk of mana. I would very much rather have Oathsworn and its pure damage and less mana cost and less combat casting cost than have this one with its, oh my god, that is that's a lot of mana and combat casting to spend on effectively just a crapshoot chance at doing anything. They get Designate Target. For 15 mana and 20 combat casting, an enemy gets 2 marked and distracted. To put in perspective just how bad this is, I think a good thing to do right now would be to just go to, we can just type Beast in here, and show Marcus Prey. Now, Marcus Prey is quite powerful, and making something as good as Marcus Prey would probably not be a good idea, but Marcus Prey distracts an enemy and gives him 3 Sundered Defense for 5 mana, 10 combat casting. Reavers, for 15 mana, 20 combat casting, give 2 marked and distracted. Marked makes them 20% easier to hit, and with the Reaver culture does make them do 20% more damage to it with ranged units, but it's really not that impressive. Engraving of Focus just gives focused aggression to all your units. Now, what is focused aggression? This unit's attacks gain ranged or magic attacks get 10% damage per stack of marked on the target. Melee attacks have a 60% chance of inflicting marked. Now, as you might imagine here, there's a bit of an issue. Obviously, that is not a very good chance to apply marked, and even more unfortunate is with no damage bonuses of their own, you really don't get that much damage to begin with. To compare, Nomad Conquerors got 20% damage after moving 3 tiles just for moving 3, and that was very, very weak. It was eventually buffed to 30% damage and a defense and a resistance for moving 3 tiles in combat. This one can give you up to 50% damage if you somehow find a way to mark an enemy 5 times. Most enemies you shoot at will have no marks on them. This is just not very strong. The Reaver Manufactorum is a mine that gives you 10 gold, so 5 extra, and then 5 drafts per adjacent quarry, forester, or mine. It is an extra source of drafts, so you'll probably end up building it, and it does affect a lot of different province improvement types, but maybe if it was like 15 gold, it was 15 gold, I would like it a little more. The primary problem with Reavers then is this is terrible, and this is really, really bad. Could you believe it even gets worse? Okay, there is one saving grace of Reavers. We'll get to it soon. Mercenary is a polearm unit at tier 1. With 80 HP, 3 defense, 1 resistance, it's got a pretty good stat line. Their melee strike is just a regular melee strike, and then they have this drive back ability. For 10 physical damage, 10 fire damage, and piercing, ignoring 50% of defense, they deal damage to an enemy and push them back. Generally pretty useful for keeping people off your ranged units and trying to apply marked. Now, this is not a base attack, so it will not scale that well. You cannot use drive back as a really high damage engage ability. Generally speaking, it'll be outdamaged by charge effects, even through piercing pretty early in the game. Later in the game, it might outdamage a charge effect due to piercing, but why would you be using a tier 1 unit late in the game? Other than that, it's just charge resistance, first strike. Now, it does have this higher defense and resistance due to high maintenance. Unfortunately, this means that for most people, the mercenary ends up being a discount shield unit. Most people would probably prefer a shield unit anyway, and I don't really have much more to say. It's high cost and just not as good as a shield unit despite being high cost. The Observer is their scout, whose unique ability is to mark enemies, which can apply one single stack of marked. It gets a sensing scope, giving it +3 sensing range. The Primal one is +6. I assure you, I'm not making this up. The Harrier is actually one of their better units, being a skirmisher with a melee strike that all it does is strike enemies in melee, and Cast Net. Cast Net is a ranged ability that has a 90% chance to immobilize enemies, which is weirdly not bad. It also applies an automatic mark, which is weirdly not bad. They might have put this on the wrong culture, but being that this ability is cooldown 1, it does mean that the Harrier can only use this every other turn, so you can't just use him as a permanent ranged harasser. One might say a Harrier. Might be a bit strong if it was cooldown 0, but yeah. The Overseer is their support unit, and it is a bit better statted by 5 HP than other tier 2 support units, and it has been buffed a lot in recent patches. Patch Up heals a friendly unit for now 45 HP and enters defense mode after use. So that's one of the better heals, but being on cooldown 2, you will have to then rely on this unit's base attack pretty frequently. It does considerably less damage than regular support base attacks, 6 less damage. It does get a chance to blind, and it will apply an automatic mark, but that's a lot less damage. It does, at champion rank, get the Patch Up effect, where it will heal 15 more and cleanse 2 effects, making it a good bit better. Now, being so low damage often means that Marking Blast will compensate for marking enemies by dealing less damage, meaning that if it just had regular damage and didn't mark, you would probably get more total damage on your turn. Unless the enemy was like giga tanky and you hit it like 7 times or something. The 2 gun units are what makes the Reaver culture so good. The Magelock and the Dragoon. Not you. The Magelock is the best tier 3 ranged unit, and it's only tier 2. I have waited for a while to make that joke. It only has 2 abilities and no passives. Snapshot Heavy Magelock is an 80% accuracy ability at 4 range that is piercing. All gun units have piercing, and this piercing and 1 AP effect of it allows it to run up to enemies and actually still do a pretty good, decent ka-chunka damage, because it is a single shot, so it double scales on enchantments. Fire Heavy Magelock is a 3 AP ability with 5 range and 100% accuracy that has 13 more base damage and still piercing. Absolutely devastating gunshot. If Magelocks are allowed to fire Heavy Magelock on 2 or even 3 turns in a row, you probably won't survive till that 3rd turn anyway. Dragoon is a skirmisher. Some might even say a master skirmisher. It is a generic defensive stat line for a tier 3 skirmisher. It is a generic melee attack for a tier 3 skirmisher. What makes it special is a synergy between Harrying Shot and Master Skirmisher. Harrying Shot has a 90% chance to distract enemies, which means that all attacks targeting that unit are flanking, which means you can Harrying Shot a unit from the front repeatedly and give all your allies the flanking bonus, which is a decent ka-chunka damage. It only has 3 range, but what happens is Master Skirmisher regains half your action points after attacking. So you can run up your full 6 movement, Harrying Shot an enemy, and then run back for half, or I should say 2 of your movement. It says half your action points, but half is 2, which, yeah. Harrying Shot itself is just a lot of damage due to that piercing, and then Master Skirmisher allows you to move. This unit is very hard to pin down. It's very hard to stop it from harassing you. It's very hard to stop it from killing the units that it wants to kill. In addition to that, it could triple attack in melee and then run away from enemies, denying them the ability to triple attack it. Master Skirmisher does not allow you to enter defense mode after using it. It did for a single patch, and that was considered very, very, very powerful, and it is just as powerful as you're thinking. It also has fleeting, which is normally not on skirmisher units, but this allows it to not be stopped by enemy zone of control, allowing it to weave in and out of wherever it wants to. You can't surround it and stop it from running away. It will continue to fleet all the way out of there. The Mage-Lock Cannon is only obtainable using war spoils, and I do not think this unit is very good anymore. That is because Fire Cannon lost its single shot effect, and ever since then it has been bad. It is a tier 3 ranged unit that has a bit better stats than a regular tier 3 unit, but it is not a racial unit. This means it will often end up, ironically, being squishier than tier 3 ranged units, despite, hypothetically supposed to be being tankier. Fire Cannon is a 5 range ability that automatically hits enemies in 3 lines. Now, or I should say a 3 hex line. That means it hits the 5th, 6th, and 7th. Technically giving this unit 7 range already by default. Being that it is not single shot, it does not scale very well, but it still does have piercing, so it will hit decently hard. The downside is a Mage-Lock Cannon can be easily denied any use of its abilities because it needs all 3 AP to fire. This means that the Mage-Lock Cannon, having no cultural benefits to damage unless the target is marked, which rarely happens in the actual game, the Mage-Lock Cannon will shoot the Mage-Lock and actually end up not dealing nearly as much damage as you would hope. Even if you enchanted it multiple times, hitting enemies for like 25 to 30 damage on your big core unit that you've been trying to keep safe and playing around won't end up winning a battle. Does this culture have any major differences in power depending on the map? Yes, this culture obviously does better on smaller maps because they can use their total war mechanic to attack empires as soon as they can and try to rush unaware empires. The downside, of course, is that for being a culture that really needs to rush and play for the early game, they are the worst at rushing of playing for the early game of basically any culture. They can catch unaware players, and they could probably try to take down people using the total war mechanic who weren't exactly expecting aggression. But if you're gonna play a rush culture, they're the worst rush culture. Industrious is a culture that people have learned to play so well that I kind of forgot they haven't been reworked. Throughout this video, I've never mentioned them as being one of the cultures that didn't get reworked. There's just a lot of tricks you can use with Industrious to make them way more powerful than they would otherwise seem. To the point that the developers did actually have to nerf them a bit because they were way more powerful than they seemed. The theme of Industrious is to be a production-based culture, but instead of producing into the late game like architects, they like to produce all their buildings and go for a mid-game power spike. Their unique world map bonus is Scout Prospecting. Scout Prospecting is when Industrious scout units stand within a friendly or neutral province that contains a cliff, mountain, or stalagmite, the player that owns a scout unit can prospect the province for production or gold rewards. Each province can only be prospected once. What that means is, when you build lots of scout units and move them throughout the map, you can prospect a lot, and by prospecting, you will give the nearest city some production, or you will give your empire some gold, which is really useful for setting up a lot in the early game. What does this culture do uniquely? That is their combat spell, which we'll get into a second, and bolstering. Bolstering is, once per turn, this unit gains bolstered defense when hit by a melee or missile attack, or bolstered resistance when hit by a magic attack. Although this doesn't scale that well, there are ways to make this quite strong and continue to be useful throughout the game. These spells and units are where this culture really starts to excel and might make it a bit more obvious why they do well. To first talk about their spells, we need to, go to the spells and just show you. The first one is Bolstering Chant. Although it's not amazing, it is pretty useful in the early game because Bolstered Defense, in my opinion, is more useful than Bolstered Resistance in the early game. Most units will tend to be melee or missile until we start going into late game units. Target friendly unit heals 20 hit points and gets 2 bolstered defense for 10 mana, 15 combat casting. I would call that pretty good. The main thing that Industrious has is Steel Fury Chant. All friendly units lose all stacks of bolstered defense and bolstered resistance. For each stack lost, they gain strengthened and fortune. If you are using ritualists, this is very easy to achieve, because you will continue to buff everybody and give them strengthen, and this just goes absolutely crazy. but it gets even better. In addition to it being able to be brought up very easily with ritualists, you can bring up your bolstered with the Materium Bolstering Matrix. Materium buff and healing spells grant 3 bolstered defense, which works exactly as you might hope it would. Steel Fury Chant with the Bolstering Matrix will remove all your bolstered defense and resistance, give you effectively 3 fortune, 5 strengthened, and then give you back 3 bolstered defense anyway. This means that Industrious gets to do a lot of damage in the mid game. Like, a lot. It's actually a lot of damage, Steel Fury Chant. This rune of Industry just gives bolstering to all the units that are not of your culture, and their unique province improvement is Builder's Quarter. One of the better special and province improvements of any culture, giving 15 production, that's 10 more than base, then 5 more per adjacent quarry. It's pretty easy to get this one up to a decent chunk of production, which allows Industrious to churn through buildings that other cultures might struggle to get produced out in a reasonable time, like an unboosted tier 4 town hall. The units of the culture did get buffed after they, I don't know why I typed it like that. The units of the culture did get buffed after they nerfed the cultural bonuses on the world map to sort of compensate. So in the last video, I said most of their units were pretty bad. In this video, they're actually pretty good. The first up is the Anvil Guard. Although I guess I could mention the Pioneer. As I did mention earlier, you run them onto mountains, they get mountain walk, and then they just prospect. You want lots of Pioneers because you want lots of prospecting. The Anvil Guard is a tier 1 shield unit that's one of the better tier 1 shield units. Not the best, but one of the better ones. It now just gets regular 10 damage, 70 HP, 5-0 stat line, so a total normal stat line. It gets the Taunt ability, which is one of the things that makes it so good, which gives you a 90% chance of taunting an enemy unit at 3 range, and you enter defense mode. This is obviously really useful because you can make enemies engage into you. You can pull enemies to, across the map to attack units they wouldn't want to be attacking. You can taunt units that can't even attack the unit because they're blocked. Maybe you've got units surrounded behind a front line, so they end up effectively just being stunned. There's a variety of uses that taunt can do, and on a tier 1 unit that you can build a lot of in the early game, it will make a lot of these early game battles just very, very, very easy. They do get passive Watchful, giving them +1 retaliation attack, so now it has 2 retaliation attacks, and when you can taunt enemies like that, I would say that that's pretty good. The Arbalist is their second tier 1 unit, which is a ranged unit with a pretty decent effect. Much like the Magelock, it does get 2 different kinds of crossbow shots. Well, I guess the Magelock gets gunshots. The first one is a 90% accuracy attack at range 4 with 24 damage. Pretty good damage, and at range, nothing bad to say about that one. If you do have 3 AP with 100% accuracy at 5 range, you can overdraw the crossbow, which deals 34 damage, cancels an enemy's defense mode, and removes a retaliation attack. Now, this is not considered a charge attack, so this will bypass charge resist. If you overdraw a crossbow, shoot an enemy, remove their retaliations, remove their defense mode, it then allows your front line to easily smash their front line. At tier 2, we have the Halberdier. Now, this unit is probably the best tier 2 unit. Well, maybe not the best in the game, but certainly one of the better ones. And that isn't due to any of his base stats. We've got totally normal base stats for a spear unit. He doesn't have a special effect on his attack. It's entirely due to the combo between Watchful for +1 retaliation and Rune of Retaliation. 40% of the damage you sustain from an attack is reflected back onto the attacker. There is no way to kill this unit in melee without losing 40% of its health in your health. Now, if you can heal this unit or you can keep him alive, that just makes this better and better. Rune of Retaliation combined with Watchful, there's almost no way to engage into a Halberdier in a way where you end up winning the trade. It's best to avoid meleeing them entirely, which is obviously the intent. The Steel Shaper is their tier 2 support unit, and as far as support units go, it's definitely not the worst. Its stat line is completely generic for a support unit, and it does not have any special effect on its attack, but what it does have is Strength from Steel. Target friendly unit loses all stacks of bolstered defense and bolstered resistance. For each stack lost, heal 8 temporary hit points and get 1 strengthened. Although later in the game it might not be the greatest because you'll be losing a lot of your bolsters for your Steel Fury chant. Early and even into the mid game, this is a pretty good heal for people. In addition to that, it does have the Grant Defense ability, which you can use early in a battle to just give people defense. This also stacks with things like Stabs of Warding. Overall, a pretty decent support, definitely worth using. The Bastion is their tier 3 shield unit that is pretty good after all the different buffs it's gotten. It now has a generic stat line for a tier 3 shield unit, which is to say a pretty good stat line. It is a optional cavalry. Its melee attack has no special effect, but what it does have is defensive sweep. Now this is cooldown 2, but it is melee based single shot and an AoE. AoE single shots are pretty rare. You deal damage to target unit, adjacent enemy units take 50% of the damage, and then you enter defense mode. This can be comboed with debuffs in order to apply debuffs in an AoE, and because it's a single shot, it will apply them at a pretty good rate. Overall, just a very good ability. Inspiring defense, this unit and adjacent friendly units gain bolstered defense. As you imagine, this is also pretty good for stacking up bolster. With Steel Fury Chant or with the Steel Shaper, this is just a great way to bolster everybody and get that going up pretty quickly. They also then get Watchful like all other Industrious melee units, which means that it's a bit hard to trade with them in melee. Overall, if you're playing melee against melee at around the tier 3 area, it's pretty hard to beat the Bastion unless you have charge units. Charge units also don't actually, ironically, do the greatest into shield units due to all the defense they would have, so the Bastion would actually still be pretty decent in this regard. And defensive sweep just gives it a really good way to engage into enemies and apply some debuffs if you have tomes like that. So overall, does it have any major differences in power depending on the map? I mean, if you're on a very large map, I would say it's obviously going to be a little bit weaker, but overall, not really that many differences overall. They've just got a very strong mid game that they can build to and use. What is the overall rating of the culture? So I believe, yes, I put them over here in A tier. They're not literally the best culture in the game, but so far as cultures that you can use and do pretty well with, they're still, I would say, within that category. They aren't the best culture, they're not bad either. I would say they're a bit unpopular for one reason or another, probably due to just how basic their effects are at this stage in the game. People don't really play them that often. The different dark subcultures are so different from each other that I found for the purposes of this video, it's best to go through them individually. I've tried multiple times, this will be the best way to do it. So what is the theme of Cult of Tyranny? They are debuffs with an exclamation mark, as well as chain conquering and vassalizing free cities. They accomplish the free city thing through hostage diplomacy. Whenever you defeat a hero belonging to a free city, it is put into your prison instead of your crypt. Now you can still kill them and sell them if you're so inclined, but you do get the choice to leave them as a hostage. Hostages provide allegiance with a free city and count as a whispering stone, so it's effectively a free whispering stone, which yes, does work about as well as you would with any Whispering Stone synergies. Whenever you conquer a free city and release it as a vassal, you will get a hostage. So, that hostage being created from thin air makes it better to conquer and vassalize free cities than ever try to vassalize them with a Whispering Stone you might generate off your Empire Affinity. You do get -1 Whispering Stone, so you would have to generate a free one from Empire Affinity tree to get one. They accomplish being the debuffs exclamation mark culture through Aura of Tyranny. Adjacent enemies have -1 status resist. All their units get that, and it does stack and exploit vulnerability. Units' attacks have a base 60% chance of inflicting status vulnerability and healing self for 5. Single shot attacks have a 90% chance of healing 10, which is a bit unique and not really how it normally works, so it's really worth mentioning. Cult of Tyranny also has some unique buildings that work differently from how other buildings work, and that is the Collector and the Shadow Trade Quarter. Your tier 2 gold building is replaced by the Collector, which gives you double the gold at 30 instead of 15, but -10 city stability. The Shadow Trade Quarter gives you double the gold at 40 instead of 20, but gives you another -10 city stability. Being that this culture does have -1 Whispering Stone, and you cannot put it onto your city then, your capital, this culture is best played with ways to generate some city stability, and best played with mechanics that either use debuffs or that can use the fact that you can vassalize a lot of people, even as an evil culture, and get them all loyal very, very, very quickly. Those are the map bonuses, and that's what it does uniquely. So what are the spells and units of this culture? Dark Tyranny really focuses on debuffs, which I did mention, and one of the ways they do that is with their spell Baneful Curse. This is 10 mana, 15 combat casting. It gives enemies in a 1 hex radius a base 90% chance of being 2 weakened, 2 misfortuned. Now, what you can do, obviously, is put your units next to enemy units to reduce their status resist to make this very easy to apply. You can also attack them a little bit and give them negative status resist through status vulnerability that will also make it very easy to apply. They get 2 world map spells, one of which is Mark of Tyranny, which just gives all your units the Aura of Tyranny and the status vulnerability heal effect and tyrannical exploitation. This makes target vassal city no longer get allegiance, but your income is increased by 20% for each point of allegiance income instead, meaning that if you had 5 allegiance from the city from a lot of hostages or the Whispering Stone in it or anything else you can think of, 5 allegiance would be 100% more income. This is one of the best and really the only way to make free cities actually really profitable. The unique SPI is the Dark Forge. It is a mine that gives you 10 gold, so 5 more gold than regular, then 5 production per adjacent quarry, mine, or forester. There are a lot of adjacent bonuses you can get from this one, although it isn't the best SPI. It's pretty easy to just slap down. It's not like something I would rush towards, but it's not exactly something I would ignore. The unique units of Dark Tyranny are then, and I'm going to have to go here to Dark Tyranny, the Outrider, who does, he gets +2 vision when in enemy domain. I forgot about that. +2 vision when in enemy terrain and mountain camouflage. It's unique, it's weird. They get what, swamp camouflage, mountain camouflage, forest. I forgot how many camouflages they get. Basically, this unit is very easy to hide on the world map, and when he's in an enemy's domain, you get more vision range, which is kind of useful. It's a scout that's very, very good at scouting. The Immortal is shared between Cult of Tyranny and Cult of Death. It is a 75 HP charge unit that has no actual special effects whatsoever other than their lesser resurgence. They don't do anything on hit other than the normal exploit vulnerability, the normal Aura of Tyranny. They do get expendable and they get lesser resurgence. Lesser resurgence is when this unit dies in combat, it is revived with 10% health if you win the combat, but you do not get movement points unlike regular resurgence. I believe regular resurgence gives you gives you move points afterwards. So the Immortal cannot die so long as you win the combat. Some might even call it immortal. This makes it very good in the early game for just keeping it alive because it can't die, it's immortal. And it will continue to rank up, and these units often will be found even into the late game at outrageously hilarious amounts of veterancy. It's pretty common for immortals to be like Exalted 3 or even 4 just because they've never really died. The Pursuer is their ranged unit, and I would say this is actually one of my more favorite and one of the better ranged units. That's because despite having no effect on its basic attack, it gets Relentless Pursuit. It starts on cooldown, and you can teleport 3 hexes. If you kill an enemy unit, it recharges the cooldown, otherwise it won't recharge. This allows the Pursuer to jump out of melee and get the finishing blow on something, and then jump out of melee and get the finishing blow on something, or jump forward and get the finishing blow on something. You can use Pursuers very easily as a unit that picks off enemy units to just do a lot of damage from range. I really do like this unit. The Tyrant Guard is probably the second or third best tier 2 unit in the game. It is so good, the Tyrant Guard. It has basic stats for a polearm unit at tier 2, nothing remarkable, nothing special there, but its melee strike has a 60% chance to immobilize. As you can imagine, in a culture focused on reducing enemies' status resist really hard, immobilizing enemies is really, really powerful. on a percent chance because you actually end up having a very high chance to immobilize enemies. Immobilized enemies are then stuck next to the Tyrant Guard, who, being a polearm unit, has charge resist and first strike, but he also has armor of contempt. It is +1 defense and +1 resist against attacks for each debuff on the attacker. This is very easy, actually, to stack up to 5 defense, 5 resistance, and will make the Tyrant Guard almost unkillable for enemies that it sticks next to it with Immobilize. This unit is devastating. They also then get the Warlock, I believe. Yeah, the Tyranny gets the Warlock. This is just a regular tier 2 battle mage. Look how squishy battle mages are. It gets weakening bolts for just 12 damage to have a 90% chance to weaken enemies. It's okay. I mean, it is a debuff. It's a culture based on debuffing. The second ability it has, now this one is the big ability. This one is so strong. Sundering Curse is a base debuff magic single shot. Target enemy unit and another within 3 hexes sustain damage. This makes it a single shot base magic attack that hits 2 different units. Very powerful. They have a 90% chance of being inflicted with Sundered Defense twice, and a 90% chance of having Sundered Resistance inflicted twice. If you do get them all the way to champion, they will also then get a 90% chance of suffering 2 weakened on the Sundering Curse. Sundering Curse is very, very, very powerful. The Warlock is very powerful. I probably wouldn't build them because I like their melee units way better. If I'm going Tyranny, Tyranny melee is just so good, but the Warlock is itself a pretty good unit. Their tier 3 unit is the Tyrant Knight, who is a very good tier 3 shock unit. It is basic stats for a tier 3 shock unit, but it has the premier 6 movement speed that actually makes it good. Its charge strike also has a second effect attached to it of a 90% chance to weaken twice. Much like the champion from Nomad Conquerors, a charge unit who weakens enemies after charging it is really good. Although, I guess the Nomad Conqueror doesn't weaken, he sunders defense. Basically, these charge strikes having more power on them, well, I mean, it makes them more powerful, obviously. It gets another ability, Trample. The Trample ability is effectively a charge that doesn't get the charge damage. It is still base melee single shot. You trample a target, you displace the attack target and move onto its hex, so it's a displace and replace effect. You cancel its defense mode, you cancel its retaliation attacks, and then afterwards, all adjacent enemies have a 90% chance of becoming weakened. So this is very good for moving enemies, it's very good for just doing AoE weakens, and it synergizes with the aura, Despotic Vitality. There's so many auras in this faction. Despotic Vitality. At the end of this unit's turn, heal for 15 hit points per adjacent enemy unit. The obvious idea here then for the Tyrant Knight is to weaken enemies constantly and then just, well, constantly heal back up after they can't kill you on their turns. It's a pretty dang strong unit that I've seen used very much with a lot of potential. Does it have any major differences in power depending on the map? Not really. Nothing really worth mentioning. The culture is still good late game. It is still good early game. It's pretty much good the entire game. Maybe you could say in the late game you could have vassals that you have full allegiance with that then you sack. You put the spell on them and you get all their power, but reasonably I would say it's a culture that's just good old game, so map size wouldn't really affect you. It's very good in single player, very good in multiplayer. So where does it have its place on the tier list? What is the overall ranking? I put Dark, there's no way I didn't put it low, right? I put it at Cult of Tyranny in A tier. Yes, Cult of Tyranny is just very strong. I wouldn't say they're quite S tier, but they're a strong culture. I've used them a lot of times, and I've never been disappointed with them. That brings us to Cult of Death. Now, what is the theme of Cult of Death? Can anyone guess? What are the world map bonuses of the culture? So, Cult of Death does not actually buff your world map, really. Not really. You could argue that it has some things, but its main effects are just in battles. It's very much a battle culture. I would say of all the different cultures, I think it has the least world map buffs of any of them. So what does it do then? Heroes in your crypts can be turned into embalmed sacrifices. Now, this does kill them, it removes them from the game and turns them into embalmed sacrifices. That's a resource. That's not like a type of hero or anything like that. Then you can use those embalmed sacrifices to cast spells like Morbid Sacrifice. They also have some unique buildings that have a use for Morbid Sacrifices. Those are the Grave Obelisk. Much like Dark Tyranny, it is a tier 2 replacement that gives double the mana, 30 instead of 15, and also gives 10 city stability. Gives city stability instead of taking it, but it does cost an embalmed sacrifice, so you will have to spend that. The Crypt Temple is then their replacement for their tier 3 mana building, giving you 40 mana instead of 20, but again costing an embalmed sacrifice, but it does give you 20 city stability. These buildings are a good way to get city stability, but you will be spending those embalmed sacrifices on them. Other good uses of your embalmed sacrifice are the enormously powerful Morbid Sacrifice spell. Costing 60 mana, 1 Morbid Sacrifice, and 60 world map casting, units in friendly province in the target province restore all hit points, so a full heal to everyone in that province, and they get universal camouflage for 3 turns, and they get 15 morale for the next battle, and they get 20 hit points for the next battle. So that's a pretty good buff. Death Waltz is their combat spell that they can use. Target friendly unit regains all its action points and health and gets resurgence and then gets doomed. It will automatically die at the end of that turn. You cannot prevent it. Death Waltz is decently good. I wouldn't trust it to auto battle for any reason ever. Never. But it is good on units that are going to die already, so you can take their turn, then you can Death Waltz to get an extra turn, or it's good on units that, well, could win you the battle maybe if they had 1 extra turn. These units do get resurgence, so if you have healing, then you can just heal them temporarily in the next battle, and just continue to keep them healed, and then Death Waltz. It's a versatile spell. It has its uses. It definitely will see use for you. Mark of the Death Cult just gives all your units power from death. Now, what is power from death? Whenever a unit dies, every unit with power from death gets a Mortal Blessing. Mortal Blessing is 5 hit points and 2% critical hit chance, stacking up to 10 times. So at 10 deaths of all units on the board, you would get 50 hit points, 20% crit. Now that does include combat summons, unlike Nomad Scavengers. If this unit stuck to Killing Blow, so if this unit killed that unit, then it gets an additional stack. Now this does include if you kill your own combat summons, you would get 2 stacks of Mortal Blessings. Obviously, it's pretty common with Cult of Death to spam combat summons and get that power from death stacked up really early. They do get the Mausoleum, which gives 10 knowledge and then 3 knowledge per adjacent conduit. I think this takes an embalmed sacrifice that might have gotten changed. Actually, I can't remember on this one. It is a research SPI, so it is pretty good. All research SPIs are good if they come from a culture, because this just allows you to scale more by stacking it with the Scholars Guild for more knowledge, or enabling you to always make sure that your cities can access an academy. Academies are the 20 knowledge building that requires at least 1 knowledge province improvement, 1... It's not called research post province improvement. Sometimes your capital is in a weird janky way where it cannot get a research post, so having one from your culture is always pretty good. Now the units for death, Cult of Death, they get the Outrider, which I went into earlier. It's very stealthy. It's good at being a scout. They get the Immortal, who unfortunately for Cult of Death, I would say is a decent chunk weaker. He's stronger, but he's also weaker at the same time, or definitely become a bit weaker. That's because instead of getting all that healing, he instead just gets power from death. Now, this does mean this unit can die, but generally speaking, in early battles, just not enough units will die for power from death to matter. So having Immortals constantly die in all your early game map clearing doesn't really do you that much good. I would rather my Immortals be Cult of Tyranny and constantly be healing back up. I just think that would be stronger. So Cult of Death, I would say, is a bit weaker on the clearing than Cult of Tyranny, but Cult of Tyranny is so good. Yeah. The Pursuer, they get the Pursuer. Still good for Cult of Death. They get the Death Guard instead of the Tyrant Guard. Now, the Death Guard does have some unique bonuses that kind of make him strong, but I wouldn't say he's as good as a Tyrant Guard. He gets melee strike, but it does not get that chance to immobilize. Instead, he gets a special ability, Deathly Vitality. On cooldown 2, this unit gains 20 temporary hit points, so it heals 20, and then an additional 10 for each stack of Mortal Blessing. Then it enters defense mode. So that's a lot of healing, but being on cooldown 2, it's pretty much once and then done. Being a tier 2 unit, it's very unlikely it's going to last through 2 additional turns of being hit. It'll probably die immediately after using it. But if you do have the full, what do you call that? If you do have the full Mortal Blessing for the 50 HP, the enemies might find you a bit impractical to kill, or at the very least not optimal to kill, so you might live to your second Deathly Vitality, but if they're not hitting you, then you don't need to heal. Other than that, it's just a generic polearm unit, whereas the Tyrant Guard I thought was like, oh my god, one of the best units in the game. The Death Guard, not so much. Now, they get the Mortalist instead of the Warlock. Decay bolts do not have a debuff, whereas weakening bolts do have a debuff. Weakening bolts weaken, decay bolts do not decay. This is science. They get Death Hex, which is a bit different. Instead of having 6 range, it's 4 range, but only costs 1 action point. Enemies get 2 stacks of decaying, and it inflicts Life Seed on enemies. Life Seed is a debuff that you put on enemies that when that unit dies, your closest ally within 4 hexes will heal 20 hit points. Meaning this is kind of like a jank healer in a way, because you might have noticed Dark doesn't have a support unit, so this is like the closest they can get to a support unit. But again, Dark Tyranny just heals a lot, so they don't need a support unit. They heal a lot. And Dark Death does need a support unit, and their support unit is okay. I don't hate it. At tier 3, they get the Deathstalker. I'm joking that it's a support unit. It's obviously a battle mage. Just in case anyone goes in the comment like, that's not a support unit. I'm joking. At tier 3, Cult of Death does get a very unique unit. I'm not sure about strong, but it is a very unique unit. Being a tier 3 fighter, fighters are very rare. Now, baseline fighters are not very good. They don't do anything. They are literally stat like a polearm unit without the polearm bonuses. So they need very strong abilities just to get to the level of a polearm. Does this unit get it? Yeah. Their base attack is melee single strike. A base 120% chance of inflicting 2 decaying, melee base single shot. It's effectively just a bad charge strike, which, as you might imagine, already makes it just look like the Tyrant Knight, but weaker. It does do 4 more base damage than a charge attack, but it does not get that 60% more damage. Deathstalk is its main ability here. Jump onto target enemy unit at 3 range, knocking them back, then entering defense mode. The damage is increased based on the opponent's lost HP. So as you might imagine, this unit is a ranged assassin. His special effects are Fatebringer, giving him 5% more damage for each stack of Mortal Blessing, and Power from Death, which is how he gets the Mortal Blessings. He gets Blessed End as another unique passive here. On kill, get 1 additional Mortal Blessing until the end of combat. So he would get 1 Mortal Blessing from a kill, 1 Mortal Blessing from Blessed End, and then 1 Mortal Blessing also from a kill. Do you get it? So he can stack up the Mortal Blessings on himself very quickly. Deathstalk has no cooldown because it doesn't come back off cooldown until you kill a unit with it. The general idea being to use Deathstalk every turn to jump on units and assassinate them, which I do believe works. I do believe that's how it works. I rarely see this unit because other than people theorizing with it, rarely anybody actually ends up using it. It is a cool unit and I would recommend you try it. That's all I can say. Okay, so are there any major differences in power depending on the map? I would say Dark Cult of Death wants a larger map. They do better and better as the game goes on. They kind of hit their stride in the late mid game and then stay at about the same power level. But I would say the shorter the game, the worse they do. They do not clear as well as Cult of Tyranny. They need to get these morbid sacrifices, or I should say the embalmed sacrifices. They need to get these up to get their buildings, to cast their spells. So they really need to be farming free cities, getting heroes from them. They really just need time to scale, is all I can say. Dark Death, you went over here, I believe, yes, B tier. They're playable, they're good, they're just not as good as some other cultures. Mystic is a culture that is divided into 3 different schools that make up its subcultures. The unifying theme is they really like spells. I'm going to go over each of them individually, but they do have some unifying ideas. Number 1, their spells, on average, that they get from their culture are really bad. The units that they get from their culture, on average, are really bad. But the effects that they get for that subculture are very, very strong. Since I last did this video, summoning has gotten a rework that has made it less broken. Attunement continues to be very strong, however, which we'll see really quickly. Attunement likes to spam spells, and they achieve spamming spells through astral echoes and echo casting. Whenever they complete a research, or they could find on the world map astral echoes. This is a resource that you can then spend on echo casting. Echo casting allows you to bypass the normal limits on your combat casting points and your world map casting points. But do note that you are still limited to how many spells you can cast per turn in combat. In combat, they get attunement starblades. Whenever they cast a spell, they get damage based on the affinity of that spell. It does stack up to 3 times, but that is per type of damage. So you can have 3 frost damage, 3 physical damage, and 3 spirit damage at the same time conceivably. As I did mention, Mystic does not have the best spells, but let's go over them. Mystic's School of Attunement has Astral Divination. This creates and reveals new astral echoes in provinces near your domain. It's probably worth casting, but it does take 300 world map casting, so you might be here for a bit if you don't already have lots of world map casting. Magic Shield is a decent enough buff spell that gives you 2 bolstered defense, 2 bolstered resistance. At a mere 5 mana, you might as well use it, but it's not really that great. School of Attunement just gives all your units, which now includes mythic units, Attunement Starblades. The unique special province improvement of this culture is Mystic Abbey, a conduit that gives you 10 mana income, that's 5 extra, and then 3 knowledge per adjacent conduit or research post. It's really not that good. Conduits are already not that good. I probably wouldn't build this one. If we're going into the way late game, I might build it, and really that's about it. What Mystic really does do that is good is and I need to look at this one, the Wizard's Auditorium. All tier 4 cities of Mystic gain 10 world map casting points and 10 combat casting points. That is quite powerful. Most cultures don't get anything for getting tier 4, but Mystic gets this, which is really, really strong. Mystic's buildings otherwise aren't really that remarkable. Mystic cultural units are really bad. Starting with the Mystic Projection, it does a mere 3 damage on a repeating attack. I don't know why it's so low, but it is a scout, so it will mostly be used for scouting. As a scout, it does have floating, which enables it to move through any terrain without penalty. It does move through mountains as if it had mountain walk with 8, which is technically still a penalty, I guess. As a scout, it is decent at scouting and being able to traverse the map, but it doesn't do anything that is exceptional, so especially with how bad it is in combat, I just wouldn't rate it very highly. The Arcanist is laughably incompetent. Being a tier 1 battle mage with 45 HP, 0 defense, 2 resistance, this unit will be it will die a lot because it gets one shot constantly. Even if it doesn't get one shot, it does a mere 9 damage on its basic attacks with no special effect on it. It has no passive other than your cultural passive. I can get through the Mystic units pretty easily because a lot of them are bare bones and really bad. The Arcane Guard is a tier 1 spear unit with normal tier 1 spear unit stats, 70 HP, 2 defense, 1 resistance. Its only special effect on the unit is that it has a 90% chance of inflicting sundered resistance. The Spell Shield is a tier 2 shield unit that is stat like most tier 2 units. Poorly. It does get a 90% chance of sundering resistance on its basic attack, which is pretty decent considering this unit can actually tank through to get it applied. And it does have 6 movement speed. That 6 movement speed allows it to run along the map really easily to use Stunning Flash. Stunning Flash does an AoE 60% stun chance to, well, adjacent enemies, which does allow you to disrupt enemy formations, and it is fast enough to get into those formations to stun people. At a 60% chance though, it's not too reliable, and this doesn't end you in defense mode afterwards, which means that you'll end up generally being not in a great spot if you don't stun the enemies. Their support unit is a Soother, which so far as support units go is not the worst. Its Cosmic Blast does 15 damage instead of 16 with no special effect passive on it whatsoever, so it's not good damage and it doesn't do anything. On the turns that it does heal, it's okay. It heals a friendly unit and another unit within 2 hexes for 20 hit points. The unfortunate aspect of this is it has cooldown 2. And if there's no ally within 2 hexes, or if there's no ally that needs healing within 2 hexes, this is a long cooldown for not a very good heal. It does get the passive effect spell channeling. While this unit is in battle, spells are 20% cheaper to cast. I would probably recommend having one Soother at all times, but often if you're Mystic Attunement or if you just have enough combat casting, it doesn't really matter. If you do manage to get to champion rank, the Soothing Breeze will heal 30 on 2 units on a 1-turn cooldown, which makes it a little bit stronger and a little bit more reasonable. A tier 3 unit from Mystic Attunement is the Spellbreaker. A tier 3 battle mage stat like any regular tier 3 battle mage, it is also an optional cavalry. The Cosmic Bolt's ability gives up 2 damage for a 60% chance of removing 1 positive status effect from who it hits. Most battle mages get an additional effect on their basic attacks, so it's weird that this one gives up 2 damage to get an additional effect. Its special ability is pretty good, Star Purge. It only does 18 damage, but does deal double damage to Magic Origin units. However, its very powerful effect is all enemy units in this effect lose all positive status effects. That obviously is going to be a bit stronger in multiplayer, but even in single player, removing all buffs is pretty good. It does mean that bringing lots of Spellbreakers can have diminishing returns, as you can't remove all their effects multiple times in one turn. If they're all gone, then they're all gone. It does have a unique passive effect, Attuned Cast. Once it enters combat, you get 10 combat casting points, once. But I would say that is pretty good still. Going back to Mystic Potential for a second, they're a little bit more complicated than Mystic Attunement. Mystic Potential really specializes in wanting to unlock lots of combat spells and lots of world map spells, more than they could use. That is due to their arcane inspiration mechanic. Whenever they cast a combat spell or a world spell, it gets a stack of inspiration. Once it reaches the maximum stacks, then you can lock it away for 5 turns in return for an increasingly large economic bonus depending on how high tier the spell was. However, you can also add inspirations to spells by their cultural spell and by their cultural building, meaning that if you have lots and lots of spells researched, you can start locking away lots of them for huge economic bonuses. In battle, the first time they cast a combat spell, it is overcharged. Overcharged will give certain bonuses to the spell depending on what type of spell it is. Their unique enchantment that they put onto their units is Dissonance. Whenever a unit with Dissonance attacks an enemy, they automatically give it a stack of Dissonance. Whenever you cast an overcharged spell, all enemies with Dissonance have them all removed and then take 4 lightning damage per stack. So they really want to have lots of different types of spells in battle. They want to have different types of spells in the world map, and you can lock down combat spells, you can lock down world map spells. You just want to research a lot with Mystic Potential. Now, as for their unique building, it is actually a pretty good unique building. It is the Academy of Potential. Now, in addition to contributing 1 arcane inspiration to a random spell each turn, it gives you 1 starting rank to every support and battle mage, meaning that Mystic Potential will be able to recruit even high tier battle mages at the very least at rank 1, or support units, I suppose. The unique spells for Mystic Potential are, as I did mention earlier, the Arcane Studies. For 10 turns, target owned city contributes 1 arcane inspiration to a random spell each turn. If you cast a spell on 3 different cities, then you will get 3 arcane inspirations on 3 random spells each turn. So this is how you really want to start stacking arcane inspirations to then lock down your spells, so then you can get huge economic bonuses. Cosmic Ablation is their combat spell, and it's actually a pretty good one. Dealing 30 combined damage for 10 mana, this is a pretty spammable spell that you will use fairly often. It's just good. Ciphers of Dissonance just grants the Ciphers of Dissonance, which inflicts dissonance to the enemy's hit to all units. Their special province improvement is a Spell Arcanist Library, a research province improvement that is pretty good for being a research province improvement. It gives you 10 knowledge income, so 5 more than normal, and 3 knowledge per adjacent conduit or research post. I feel like I've seen that one before. So Mystic Potential does have their unique cultural unit, and I would say it is probably worthless and never even worth looking at. A tier 3 battle mage stat like a tier 3 battle mage, its Rift Bolts does 14 damage but has no passive effect. Its special ability, Dissonant Weave, does a mere 16 damage and then cascades. Unfortunately, having no passive effect. It just applies Dissonant, which is part of the culture, so I wouldn't count that as a passive effect. It also has cooldown 2 compared to where, well, this guy also has cooldown 2. Wait, they both have cooldown 2. Damn it, Mystic cultural units. So even if you get a full cascade on like 18 units, this will not deal much damage, and it's unlikely that you're going to get a cascade on more than like 3, 4, 5 units. Highly unlikely. It's just not a very good battle mage. Its passive here is Arcane Conduit. You get 5 combat casting points per turn, but being that this unit is so bad, every turn that you have this unit on the board, I would say even with Arcane Conduit is a net negative on you still. Blast is Mystic Summoning, the school of summoning, specializing in summoning with the theme of lots of summoning. Throughout the world map, Mystic Summoning can find astral echoes and pick them up. This is a resource they can spend on Echo Infusion. Echo Infusion allows them to give a magic origin enough experience to reach the next rank, and they can repeat this so long as they have enough astral echoes. This is most commonly used to make tier 1 units into legendaries so that they evolve into a tier 3 unit, or on tier 5 mythic units to make them really, really strong legendaries, meaning the power spikes of Mystic Summoning are like really high early game and then a bit late game and then kind of flatlines after that one. Magic origin units of this culture get attunement Astral Resonance. When a friendly spell is cast, this unit is healed for 10 temporary hit points. Do note that the Eldritch Lord is actually considered a magic origin unit and will be a magic origin unit. That's just something worth noting. Keep that in mind. This culture's units gain Astral Connection. When adjacent to a friendly magic origin unit, both units get 1 defense, 1 resistance. This effect stacks. This means if you put a racial unit next to a magic origin unit, they will both get 1 defense, 1 resistance. If you put 2 cultural units next to a magic origin unit, the cultural units will each get 1 defense, 1 resistance, and the magic origin unit will get 2 defense, 2 resistance. Do you understand how that works? Okay. There are no remarkable buildings for this culture. I wouldn't even look at them. We're going to skip right past them. So let's look at their spells. First up, we have the Conjure Summoning Rift. Conjures a summoning rift on an empty hex of the target province. This structure allows summoning spells to be cast on or adjacent to it, provides vision in a 5 hex radius, units in the province regenerate 15 hit points per turn, and during combat in this province, friendly combat summoned spells are 20% cheaper to cast. It is okay. The healing is ironically actually the most powerful thing here. Being able to give people world map healing can help you out in the early game to top people off. The combat summon effect is not very good, and I would say that's just because most combat summon spells themselves are just not very good. The second spell they have is a combat summon spell, ironically, that summons an immobile astral ward. This summon lasts for 3 turns. All it does is summon down a 25 HP tower that warding links to an ally. Instead of that ally taking damage, the Conjure Astral Ward takes damage. Now, it does get 5 HP per rank, so as you build up your wizard tower, it will get a little bit more HP. but this is really not that good. I see it get used mostly because people have nothing better to do, not because it's good. Astral divination creates and reveals new astral echoes in provinces near your domain. It is a good way to kind of refill and get astral echoes because you might have taken them all on the map, but it is a lot of world map casting points, so you might spend a bit of time casting this one. And then Scroll of Astral Connection just gives all non-mystic, non-magic origin units astral connection. If you're a magic origin, then you do not get it. Their special province improvement is the Astral Monolith. It is a conduit with 10 mana income and 5 mana per adjacent conduit or research post. Mystic Summoning can use a lot of mana, that they will actually sometimes use this one, and they can often get it to like 20 mana, so 15 mana more than a regular conduit. It's okay, only really because it's within Mystic Summoning, otherwise I really wouldn't use it. The unique cultural unit for Mystic Summoning, ironically enough, of all the cultural units, the one that is actually fairly good is the one for the summoning culture. The Summoner for the School of Summoning is actually not bad. A typical tier 3 support unit, 80 HP, 2 defense, 4 resistance. It does have a typical 20 damage attack with no passive effect, but it does have 2 pretty strong abilities here. The first one is Spirit Summon Dormant. Now, if you do get to champion rank, you will get champion spirit summon, so it gets 2 strength in. That's not really important. A lot of summon units will make their summon a lot stronger if they reach champion rank. This one really doesn't. This ability transforms into a spirit summon based on the affinity of the last spell cast by their side. Now, what is noticeable about this is it is a summon with a leave 1 AP effect. That's a pretty important distinction between it and other summoned spells. So if you cast a order spell, then use this, you'll get a light spirit. If you cast a chaos spell, then use this, you'll get a magma spirit, and so on and so forth. So this will still leave you with 1 AP to attack. Astral Blood is another ability that leaves you with 1 AP. With cooldown 0, the target unit inflicts 20% more damage, but it's a link, but you can only link the magic origin unit. So that magic origin unit will get 20% more damage and heal for 20 hit points at the start of every turn. Being cooldown 0, you can cast this every single turn. It's just not cooldown none, because if it had no cooldown, you could cast it on every single unit about to attack. But you can freely use this. It is 4 range, and then it still leaves you with 1 AP. So the Mystic Summoner actually does get to attack, or at the very least enter defense mode pretty frequently, which isn't the worst. Then it has that astral connection from being Mystic Summoning, so it does kind of have some synergy to have some racial units around. It really depends on if you want to bother with it or not. I would say he's worth using, but I don't see him get used very often. I might just like summoning units more than other people like support summoning units. So where does that leave Mystic as a whole? Does it have any major differences in power depending on the map? I would say not really. Of all cultures that differ based on map size, I would say Mystic differs the least. They really don't like using their cultural unit. They really just like spamming summons. So if they spam tier 1 summons early in the game, or they spam tier 5 summons later in the game, it doesn't really matter to them. I would say Mystic Potential maybe does better on hyper large maps because they can get outrageous combat casting. Outrageous world map casting, and then cast a lot of world map spells and destroy people, but otherwise, of all cultures, I don't think they're overall that impacted. What is the overall rating of the culture? So coming up last here, I would say Mystic Attunement comes in at S tier in vanilla. That's because Mystic Attunement currently has one of the... There are a few combos in vanilla that I would say are almost unbeatable, and Mystic Attunement does actually have one of those. Using Astral Echoes and Echo Casting, they can cast the Eldritch spell. The Eldritch Lord does get a spell on the world map that will deal % health damage to enemies. And if you can use Astral Echoes and Echo Casting and chain cast that spell over and over and over again, you can delete a stack entirely from existence on the world map with no hope of counterplay. You can just delete someone's Lord with no counterplay. It's a bit screwy. But it is one of those S tier combos. That's why attunement is up here. Otherwise, being able to chain summon mythic units is very strong. I also think that their cultural bonus is pretty good for early game battles. Being able to now use their cultural bonus on mythic units is pretty strong. Really, I would just say attunement is just a very, very strong culture. Then for summoning and potential, I put them down here in B tier. I think they're fine, but potential's not very good at battles. They're mostly good at getting an economy up and then getting lots of world map casting and trying to cast down lots of mythic units. But if you're gonna do that, isn't attunement just better? I guess is my question. And then it comes down to, yeah, mystic summoning, as you probably have guessed here, is not even the best at summoning because they can't get enough world map casting to summon enough. Mystic attunement can use astral echoes and echo casting to summon down lots of mythics. Mythic potential, mystic, there's mythic and mystic, and it sounds like I have a list, but I assure you it's just because S and it's just mythic, mystic. Ugh. Okay. Mystic potential can then use arcane inspiration and lockdown spells, which will give them a lot of world map casting, and they can use that to summon down lots of mythic units. Mystic summoning actually, ironically, doesn't have any mechanic like that. Funny enough, mystic summoning is the worst at summoning. Okay, so that marks the end of this video. Finally, this video has taken me a very, 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 very long time to make, with more takes than you could possibly imagine. In fact, I have so many takes on this video that, like, oh my god, this just goes on. The amount of times I've tried to do this, I've wagered I have like 20 hours making this video. So if you have made it this far, congratulations. I'm sure the quality has dipped at certain points because it has taken me so long to do this video. I'm probably more tired at the end of the video than I am early in the video. I probably was a bit bored at parts of the video. I can't really tell, but oh my god, this video has taken a very long time to make. So please make sure to like, please make sure to subscribe, please make sure to leave a comment down below. I'm finally getting this video out because I keep delaying it because I keep thinking I'm doing certain parts bad. Like, I don't think I did the mystic part the best, but like I have to push myself through and actually get this done at some point, right? So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.